Yo, what's up everyone? It's Bald Voldemort and today we're checking out what if Harry was raised by Wonder Woman and returned to Hogwarts as the Prince of Themyscira. Drop a like if you're hyped, subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The boy who was taken home. The village of Godric's Hollow was quiet in the way that only catastrophe makes a place quiet. No wind, no owls. Even the leaves on the old oak at the end of Myrtle Lane had stopped their autumn restlessness, hanging still and heavy in the dark like they were holding their breath. The houses nearest to the end of the lane had their curtains drawn, though a few pale faces pressed against glass. Neighbors who had heard the sound, that awful sound, like the sky itself had cracked open and swallowed something. They didn't come outside. Whatever had made that noise, whatever had left that column of dust rising pale against the October stars, was not something you walked toward. Bathilda Bagshot's cat sat on her garden wall and stared at the ruined cottage without blinking. Diana landed 3 streets away. She came down fast and hard, her boots hitting cobblestone with a crack that left 2 neat impressions in the stone, and she was already moving before the sound faded. She wore no armor tonight. She'd been in London for a meeting of the leg, dressed in ordinary clothes, a long coat over dark trousers, her hair loose around her shoulders. The lasso at her hip was coiled under the coat, hidden but present, the way it always was. She had felt it. That was the only way to describe it, not heard, not seen, but felt somewhere behind her sternum, a tearing sensation like something being ripped out of the fabric of the world. 3,000 years of living gave a person a sensitivity to such things. Magic had a texture, a weight, and whatever had happened on this quiet English street had left a scar on the air itself. She turned the corner onto the lane and stopped. The cottage was half standing. The upper floor had simply ceased to exist. On one side, a clean, terrible absence open to the night sky, a child's mobile still rotating slowly in the exposed room above. A teddy bear sat in the rubble of the garden wall, untouched, one glass eye-catching starlight. Diana walked through the broken gate. She had known Lily Potter. Known her for 3 years, through the League, and through the particular kind of friendship that forms between women who understand that the world is larger and stranger, and more dangerous than most people are ever willing to admit. Lily had been extraordinary, not just in magic, which had burned in her like a clean, steady flame, but in the particular quality of her attention. She looked at you and actually saw you. Diana, who had been seen by kings and gods and had mostly found the experience wanting, had valued that more than she'd ever said aloud. She found Lily at the foot of the stairs. She stood there for a long moment. The grief was immense and she let it be immense, didn't push it down or away, because Diana had learned long ago that grief refused to be hurried. She pressed her fingers to Lily's hair gently, a warrior's farewell, and then she heard it. A sound from upstairs, not crying. Something smaller than crying, a soft, puzzled sound, like a question being asked in a language that didn't have words yet. Diana moved up the remaining staircase in 4 steps, ducked through the half-collapsed doorway at the top, and found him. He was sitting up in his crib, which had survived whatever had torn the outer wall away with the specific, absurd stubbornness of baby furniture. He had dark hair, wild and sticking out in every direction, and his father's face. She had met James Potter twice briefly and recognized those cheekbones and that jaw immediately, but his eyes, when he turned them on her, were entirely Lily's. Green and direct and already somehow watching. There was a cut on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt. It wasn't bleeding anymore. It looked more like a brand than a wound. Diana crossed to the crib and the baby reached up immediately and grabbed her finger with both hands. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. "Harry," she said. She had heard Lily say the name 100 times in that warm, particular way mothers say the names of their children, like the word itself was made of something precious. Harry considered this, still gripping her finger. Then he said with great seriousness, "Bah." Diana laughed. It came out of her sudden and genuine. Startled out of the grief by this small person who had no idea his world had just ended and was already apparently prepared to have opinions about it. She heard the motorcycle before she saw the headlight, a huge growling thing that came to a stop outside, followed by the creak of the garden gate and the heavy thud of very large feet moving through rubble. She was already standing, Harry held against her shoulder, when the large man darkened the doorway. Very large, she revised, enormous actually, with a beard that seemed to have its own weather system and eyes that went red immediately at the sight of the room. He stopped when he saw her. His expression cycled rapidly through shock, grief, confusion, and the particular look of a man who has run out of categories for the thing in front of him. "Hooray you," he managed. "My name is Diana. I was Lily's friend." She kept her voice steady and her posture easy. Harry settled comfortably in the crook of her arm. "You're here for Harry." Yeah, Dumbledore sent me. I'm to take him to his aunt and uncle's, Privet Drive, Surrey." He stopped. His enormous hands balled and unballed at his sides. He was clearly fighting not to cry and losing badly. That's Harry you've got." "It is." I'm supposed to take him. Diana looked at him. He had kind eyes under all that hair, genuinely kind, the sort that couldn't fake itself. He wasn't here because of orders, not really. He was here because he had loved these people. What's your name? Hagrid, Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. He drew himself up slightly, and she respected that grief and dignity wearing the same coat. Hagrid. She shifted Harry slightly, and the baby grabbed a handful of her hair with immediate and total commitment. I know Dumbledore wants him at Privet Drive. I know why, but you have been inside that house before tonight, yes. You have met Petunia Dursley. Hagrid's expression said everything. His mouth opened, closed, and then he looked at the floor. Lily told me, Diana said simply. She told me what her sister thought of magic, what she thought of Lily, what she would think of this boy. She paused. Tell me honestly, do you believe he would be safe there, not protected, safe? The big man's face was a misery. Dumbledore says the blood protection. I know about the blood magic, and I respect it, but magic is not the only protection a child needs. She waited. Hagrid rubbed his eyes with the back of his fist. He looked at Harry, who was now trying to eat Diana's hair with the focused determination of someone attempting a very important task. Something shifted in Hagrid's expression. The grief was still there, would always be there, but underneath it a different kind of feeling was working its way through. Where would you take him? Hagrid asked very quietly. Somewhere safe, Diana said. Somewhere good, somewhere he will be loved and trained and taught to know his own worth. She met Hagrid's eyes. I promise you that. Hagrid stood there in the ruined room for a long time. Outside, the motorcycle ticked and cooled. The mobile above the crib turned slowly in a breeze that had no source. He'll still have to go to Hogwarts, Hagrid said finally. When he's 11, that's his world too, that is, his mum's world. Can't take that from him. I wouldn't, Diana said, on my honor. Hagrid nodded. He reached out with one huge, gentle finger and touched Harry's cheek, and Harry grabbed it immediately, transferring his full gripping enthusiasm from Diana's hair to Hagrid's finger without hesitation. Blimey, Hagrid said softly, and his voice broke on the word. He's got her eyes, hasn't he? Yes, Diana said, he does. Hagrid stood there another moment, then stepped back. He reached into his enormous coat and produced a folded piece of parchment, an envelope she realized, sealed with a wax stamp. He held it out. From Dumbledore, meant to go with Harry to the Dursleys. Suppose it should go with him wherever he ends up. He paused. I'll tell Dumbledore I couldn't find the boy, that the cottage was empty when I got here, that whoever killed James and Lily took the child as well. Diana took the envelope. You're a good man, Hagrid. I'm a great fool is what I am, he said, but not unkindly. He looked at Harry one last time, a long, memorizing look, the kind people make when they're storing something up against future need. You keep him safe. With my life, Diana said. She was gone before he was back through the garden gate. Straight up into the dark English sky, Harry tucked against her chest with the practiced ease of someone who had carried things more precious than treasure, moving west, then south, then through a veil that was not quite sky and not quite sea, and arrived, 20 minutes later, at the edge of the most protected place in the world. The island rose out of the Aegean before dawn, all white cliffs and terraced gardens and the smell of sea and jasmine, lit from below by lights that were not electric and not quite fire and not quite magic either, but something older than both. Themyscira. Home, she went to her mother first. She always went to her mother first. Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons, was in the inner courtyard when Diana arrived, as if she had been waiting, and she probably had been because her mother had instincts that outstripped explanation and always had. She was a tall woman, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked gold hair and eyes the color of old bronze, and she took one look at the bundle against Diana's chest and went very still. Diana. His name is Harry, Diana said. His mother was my friend, she died tonight. Hippolyta was quiet for a long moment. Diana could feel her mother working through it, the implications, the complications, the thousand ways this could be difficult. The Queen of the Amazons was not a sentimental woman in any simple way, but she was a just one, and she had watched her daughter for centuries and understood her in the way that only mothers who have truly paid attention ever understand their children. An outside child, Hippolyta said, on the Themyscira. Yes, this breaks a great many rules, Diana. Yes, and you are asking anyway. I'm telling you, Diana said, I'm not asking. But I'm telling you because I want you to know, and because he deserves to know his grandmother someday. The silence stretched. A night bird called somewhere in the gardens. Harry, who had been asleep against Diana's shoulder for the last few minutes of flight, chose this moment to wake up, observe his new surroundings with calm interest, and reach toward Hippolyta with both hands. Hippolyta looked at those hands, then at his eyes. Gods, she said softly, look at those eyes. She reached out and took him, and Harry went to her without complaint, with the total trust of a child who has, so far, been caught every time he fell. He grabbed a lock of her hair exactly as he had grabbed Diana's. Hippolyta made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. You are impossible, she told the baby, and then to Diana, he stays. He grew up between water and light. By 3, he was faster than most children twice his age, because the island had a way of making things grow strong, and because he had grown up watching women who moved like water over stone and had, with the single-minded intensity of the very young, decided to do the same. By 5, he could swim the harbor in the time it took most adults to reach the far dock, and he had learned to climb the white cliffs barehanded by following Diana's route and ignoring every person who told him it wasn't safe. It's safe, he told Antiope, Diana's aunt, the greatest warrior on the island, a woman who had faced creatures that made strong men weep and had never in anyone's memory looked even slightly worried about anything, with the complete confidence of a 5-year-old who had not yet learned the performance of doubt. I can see exactly where all the handholds are. Antiope looked at the cliff, looked at him. You fell twice. And I caught myself both times, Harry pointed out. She studied him for a moment, then went back to sharpening her blade. He argues like a philosopher and climbs like a goat, she said to no one in particular. This child will be trouble. That's not a no, Harry said. She began teaching him to fight the following week. He was 7 when he first understood what he was. Not an Amazon, he had always known he was different, had grown up knowing it, the same way a child raised on an island knows they cannot walk to anywhere else, but in the good way, not the hard way. Diana had been honest with him from the beginning, the way she was honest about everything, with the directness of someone who believed truth was a kindness even when it hurt. Your mother was a witch, Diana told him, the two of them sitting on the cliff edge above the eastern harbor, watching the sun pull itself out of the Aegean. She had waited until he was old enough to ask the right questions, which had happened at 7, because Harry asked questions the way other children breathed. A real witch, not the stories, not what people in your father's world called a muggle's idea of it. She had a gift for magic that very few people have ever had. She was extraordinary, Harry thought about this. Was she nice? She was wonderful, Diana said, and her voice had that quality it only had when she talked about specific people she had lost, not sad exactly but waited. Real, brilliant and fierce and funny, and she loved you from the first moment she knew you existed. And my father, brave, loyal. He died trying to protect you both. Harry was quiet for a moment, his feet dangling over the cliff's edge, watching a pelican make its lazy circle over the harbor. And Voldemort, he had learned the name early. Diana believed in naming things. Voldemort was a man who chose power over everything else, who chose so many times to take instead of build, to destroy instead of create, that eventually there was nothing left of him that was human enough to understand what he'd lost. She paused. He tried to kill you when you were 15 months old. He failed, Harry said. He said it straightforwardly without drama because it was true. He failed, Diana agreed, because of your mother. What did she do? Diana told him, about the choice and the sacrifice and the ancient magic, older than wands and older than wizards, that lived in the decision to die for someone you loved. Harry listened with the focused stillness he brought to things that mattered. So she won, he said. Yes, she won. Good. He picked up a small stone and pitched it off the cliff, watching it arc down toward the water. Can you teach me about wands, since I'll need one eventually? I don't use wands. I know. But you know about them, she did. She had spent the months after bringing him home reading everything she could find through the League's archives, through careful conversations with people who still moved between worlds. She knew enough. We'll find someone better than me for that, she said. But yes, when you're ready. He turned to look at her, and in that moment, with the morning light full on his face and his mother's eyes bright and serious and completely unafraid, she felt something expand in her chest that she recognized after a moment as an almost unbearable pride. Diana, he said. Am I going to be okay? In the wizard world, I mean, they're going to know who I am. Yes, she said, they will. Is that going to be a problem? Diana considered him. The boy who had climbed her cliffs and argued philosophy with her aunt and learned the Amazonian sword forms with the same earnest ferocity he brought to reading, who had sat with her mother in the evenings and listened to 3,000-year-old stories with his chin in his hands and his eyes enormous, who had cried exactly twice in his life in front of other people. Once when a horse he loved broke its leg. Once when he read about what had been done at Auschwitz in a history book he found in Diana's library and had come to find her immediately, book in hand. Because that was Harry, he couldn't sit with horror alone, he needed to understand it. She considered all of that, all of him, and smiled. Not for you, she said. The letter came on a Tuesday in July, which was notable because nothing important ever happened on Tuesdays on the Themyscira. It arrived the way Wizard Post always arrived for Harry, through a complicated arrangement Diana had set up involving a relay point in Athens and a very confused but well-compensated owl. And Harry opened it at the breakfast table while Antiope watched over her tea with the specific expression of someone who had been told this moment was coming and still wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it. Mr. H. Potter, The Eastern Harbor Cliffs, Themyscira. Harry held the envelope for a moment just to acknowledge it, then opened it. He read the letter twice, then he set it down and looked at Diana. September 1st, he said. September 1st, Diana confirmed. He nodded, reached for his orange juice. He was quiet for a moment, not anxious quiet, but the particular quiet of someone running through a list, checking things off internally. I'll need robes, he said. Yes, and a wand. Yes, we'll go to Diagon Alley, I know where it is, and books, and an owl apparently. He looked up. Can I bring a sword? Antiope made a sound into her tea that was half laugh, half something else entirely. Diana kept her face composed. It's a school, Harry. Schools have rules about weapons, he agreed pleasantly. But Antiope always says the best weapon is the one they don't know you have. I was talking about my hands, Antiope said. I know I'm making a philosophical point. He looked back at the letter. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he read. Headmaster Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He paused. That's a lot of names. He's a complicated man, Diana said carefully. Harry looked at her. He was very good, had always been very good, at reading the spaces around what Diana said as much as the words themselves. You don't entirely trust him. I trust that he's intelligent and that he genuinely wants what he believes is best for the wizarding world. That's not the same as trusting him. No, Diana said, it isn't. Be respectful, be fair, give him the chance to be what he wants to be. She met his eyes, but don't let him manage you. No one manages me, Harry said, and he said it the way Antiope said things, not as a boast, just as a fact, something so obvious it barely needed saying. He looked back at the letter. I wonder what house I'll be in. Which do you want? He thought about it with genuine seriousness. Gryffindor, he said. Mum was a Gryffindor. Diana smiled. Antiope put her tea down. Before you go, she said, we have 2 months, and there are 3 sword forms you have not yet mastered. Harry was already pushing back his chair. I know, he said. I was going to ask about that this morning. Antiope looked at Diana. Diana looked back. 2 months later, when they stood at the edge of the harbor in the early morning of August 31st, and Harry stood before them with his trunk packed and his owl, a beautiful snowy owl he'd named Athena, to the actual Athena's considerable amusement, on his arm and his eyes very bright, the moment felt both enormous and entirely inevitable. Hippolyta was there too. She pressed both hands to Harry's face in the old Amazonian farewell, the one reserved for warriors going somewhere important, and looked at him for a long moment. You are a son of this island, she said. Whatever they call you there, whatever name they give you, whatever boxes they build around you, remember that. I will, Harry said. Antiope gripped his shoulder once hard in the way that said everything she wouldn't. Harry gripped back. Then he looked at Diana and she looked at him, and 11 years of mornings and arguments and cliff climbs and stories and sword forms and questions about Voldemort and questions about everything else were all right there in that look. And Diana pulled him into a hug that he returned completely, his face pressed against her shoulder. Write to me, she said. Every week, he said. Every week, she confirmed. And Harry, he pulled back and looked at her. Your mother gave you life, Diana said. Your father gave you courage, the island gave you strength. She touched the lightning bolt scar on his forehead gently with one finger. And you will give yourself the rest. Harry held her gaze for a moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, sudden and brilliant, his mother's smile on his father's face, and turned toward the boat that would take him to Athens, and from Athens to London, and from London to a world that had no idea what was coming. Diana watched him go. Behind her, Antiope spoke quietly. He's going to terrify them. Yes, Diana said. She was still smiling. He is. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September. Harry found platform 9 3/4 without difficulty. He had read about it, had made Diana find him every scrap of information she could about the wizarding world, had spent his last 2 months alternating between sword forms with Antiope and reading Hogwarts, a history cover to cover twice. He walked through the barrier at a steady pace, no hesitation, and stepped out onto the platform with the particular quality of attention that Antiope had spent years trying to teach him and he had simply arrived with. Taking everything in at once, cataloging, alive to detail. The train was red and enormous and beautiful. The platform was chaos, families, trunks, owls, cats, someone's toad leaping repeatedly from a hatbox with suicidal determination, a pair of red-headed twins lobbing something that might have been a firework back and forth over the heads of smaller students. The air smelled like coal and magic, and the particular anxious excitement of hundreds of children standing on the edge of something new. Harry breathed it in and felt with some surprise that he liked it. He had no family to say goodbye to. He had said his goodbyes this morning properly, so he loaded his trunk with efficient ease and went looking for a compartment. He found one near the back, already occupied by a single boy, round-faced, small for his age, holding a toad to his chest with the desperate grip of someone who had been running for some time. Is that compartment seat taken? Harry asked. The boy looked up, blinked. Number no, it's please sit down, keep the door closed, Trevor keeps. The toad made another bid for freedom and the boy caught it with a reflexive grab doing that. Here, Harry sat across from him and held out his hand. The boy looked at it, then passed the toad over. And Harry simply held the animal with the calm of someone who had handled far more alarming creatures and waited. Trevor, apparently sensing something had shifted in the power dynamics, settled down immediately and sat in Harry's hands with something close to dignity. The boy stared. How did you do that? I don't know, animals usually trust me. He handed Trevor back. I'm Harry Potter. The boy's eyes went wide. I'm Neville Longbottom. A pause. Are you really? Am I really Harry Potter? Yes. He said it matter-of-factly with no particular weight. It was a fact about himself, like being left-handed or having his mother's eyes. You're going to Hogwarts? Yes, you? Yes. Harry leaned back in his seat. What do you know about it? I've read a fair amount, but I'd rather hear it from someone who grew up around magic. Neville blinked again. He seemed to do that a lot, recalibrating. He had the look of someone who wasn't used to being the person who knew more than someone else, and was not sure what to do with the sensation. But Harry asked with a genuine interest that was hard to deflect. And so Neville talked, haltingly at first and then with more confidence. And by the time the train had cleared London, he had relaxed enough to forget to be nervous about Harry Potter and was simply talking to Harry, who listened well and asked good questions, and had the useful quality of making the person he was listening to feel like what they were saying was actually interesting. The compartment door slid open halfway through Surrey, and a red-haired boy with freckles and a smear of something on his nose leaned in. Sorry, everywhere else is full, do you mind? Not at all, Harry said. There's room. The boy dragged his trunk in, heaved it onto the rack with some difficulty and dropped into the seat beside Neville. He had a look about him, open and slightly chaotic, the comfortable confidence of someone from a large family who has never had to perform anything for anyone. Harry liked him immediately. Ron Weasley, the boy said by way of introduction. Harry Potter. Ron looked at him, Harry looked back. Ron's eyes went to his forehead briefly. He was clearly trying not to stare, then back to his face. Right, Ron said. Brilliant. Then, because he was apparently the sort of person who moved through awkwardness by walking directly through it. Is that true then? About you know who, were you really there? I was 15 months old, Harry said. I don't remember it, but yes. Blimey, Ron absorbed this. My mum always gets upset when I bring it up, says it's not polite to ask. It doesn't bother me, Harry said, and he meant it. He had grown up with it as a known thing, discussed honestly, not hidden or hushed or treated like something fragile. It was part of his history, not a wound that required protecting. I grew up knowing about it. It's fine to ask, Ron visibly relaxed. Where'd you grow up then? Not with wizarding folk, I heard. Number not with wizarding folk. Harry considered how much to say and decided because he generally preferred directness on the truth. I was raised on an island called Themyscira, in the Aegean. Ron stared. A Greek island, more or less. By who? Her name is Diana. She's an Amazonian warrior. He said it the same way he would say she's a teacher or she's a doctor, just a fact. He watched Ron's face go through several distinct expressions in rapid succession. You can ask. Is she? Are you having me on? Number and Amazons, Ron repeated, like a real one, very real. She's about 3,000 years old and she can bend steel with her bare hands. Harry said this with a certain quiet pride that was entirely genuine. She's the best person I know. The compartment was quiet for a moment, then Ron turned to Neville. Did you know about this? I just met him, Neville said. Ron turned back to Harry. Right, he said again. Then, with the adaptability of someone who has grown up in a family with gnomes in the garden and ghosts at the dinner table, that's brilliant, actually, he grinned. Fred and George are going to lose their minds. Harry smiled. The door opened again, and this time it was a girl with wild bushy hair and sharp, assessing eyes that moved around the compartment like she was cataloging everything she saw. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville. Oh, there it is. She looked at Neville. Is that yours? Yes, Neville said. He keeps escaping. You should charm the clasp on the box. There's a simple sticking charm. I read about it in the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. She said this not unkindly, just efficiently as someone sharing useful information. She glanced at Harry. You're Harry Potter. Yes, Harry said. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you not a lot. The books were mostly speculation, and I find speculation without evidence annoying, but the actual historical account in modern magical history was interesting. She looked at him with frank curiosity. Is it true you were raised outside the wizarding world? I was too. I'm Muggle-born. My parents are dentists. Yes, it's true, Harry said. Come sit down. She looked at him, checking something, he could tell, some assessment, and whatever she found apparently satisfied her, because she sat, pulled a book from under her arm that she didn't open. and looked at him with the focused attention of someone who had decided this was worth her time. "Where were you raised?" "Themyscira," she blinked, once precisely, "the Amazon island." "Yes, that's extraordinarily interesting actually," she leaned forward slightly. "In the context of ancient Greek magical traditions, Themyscira is referenced in pre-classical texts as a locus of ancient." She stopped herself, apparently deciding mid-sentence that enthusiasm needed direction. "Do you have any practical magical training, not wand work but fundamental magical theory?" "Some," Harry said, "more practical than theoretical." "I'm the opposite," she said, and there was something in her voice, a brief, honest acknowledgement of a gap that Harry found more interesting than any performance of confidence would have been. "I know everything in the books and I haven't been able to do much with it yet." "Yet," Harry said. She looked at him again. This time she smiled, small and real. "Yes, yet." Outside the window, England rolled past, green fields, small towns, the late afternoon sun beginning its slow slide toward the hills. In the compartment, 4 children who had never met before this morning sat together in the easy, slightly improbable comfort of people who have recognized something in each other, and the train moved north. And ahead, somewhere past the horizon, a castle waited. Harry leaned back in his seat and watched the world go by and felt something he couldn't quite name, something that wasn't happiness exactly and wasn't excitement exactly but was adjacent to both, shot through with the clean clarity of standing at the edge of something real and being entirely ready for it. His mother had been here, had walked these corridors, spoken these spells, learned these things in these rooms, had been 11 once and felt this. He pressed his fingers briefly to the scar on his forehead, not a habit, just a moment of acknowledgement, and then let his hand fall. Forward then. Chapter 2, the prince arrives at school. The boats cross the lake in silence that wasn't really silence at all. There was water moving against wood, and the breathing of 60 nervous first years, and somewhere across the black water a castle that was doing something no building should be able to do. It was glowing, not from lights in windows but from somewhere deeper, like the stone itself had absorbed centuries of magic and was quietly giving it back to the dark. Harry sat in the front of the lead boat with Ron beside him and watched it come closer and felt the back of his neck prickle the way it did when he was near something genuinely old. Themyscira was old. He knew old. But this was different. Themyscira's age was natural, geological, the age of things that had always existed. Hogwarts felt like something that had been built old, like the people who made it had understood that some things needed to feel like they had always been there and had planned accordingly. "Blimey," Ron breathed. "Yeah," Harry said. Hermione, 2 boats back, was very deliberately not saying anything. Harry could see her profile in the moonlight and could tell from the set of her jaw that she was actively restraining herself from commenting on the structural integrity of a castle built partially over water on a Scottish loch. He respected the effort. Neville's knuckles were white on the edge of the boat. Harry had noticed that Neville's default state seemed to be a kind of braced-for-impact anxiety, like someone perpetually expecting something to go wrong. And he had also noticed that Neville kept going anyway, kept showing up, kept trying, kept holding that toad, and found that more interesting than the anxiety itself. The boats docked at the base of the cliff and a woman was waiting for them. Professor McGonagall was the kind of person who didn't need to raise her voice because she had a better tool, the quality of her stillness. She stood at the entrance with a lamp in one hand and 61st years went quiet in about 4 seconds flat, which Harry privately clocked as impressive. She wore deep green robes and her hair was pulled severely back, and her expression communicated without words that she had done this for 30 years and found it generally satisfying and would tolerate no nonsense. She looked at them all in one sweeping assessment and her gaze paused briefly, just a fraction of a second, when it reached Harry, then it moved on. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said. "In a few moments you will be sorted into your houses. Your house will be your family for the next 7 years. The 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Now follow me." They followed. The entrance hall was enormous, not in the way of modern buildings, which were enormous through engineering, but in the way of spaces that had been made big to make people feel small by comparison to something important. The ceiling was vaulted stone, the torches real fire, the suit of armor nearest the door better maintained than the ones at the island's armory, Harry noticed. The noise of the older students filtering in from the grounds drifted through the great oak doors to the right. A group of ghosts drifted through the wall on their left, and about a third of the first years made sounds of alarm. Harry watched them with interest. He had read about the castle's ghosts. The one in the front, portly, cheerful-faced, a ruff around his neck, was Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, the Gryffindor ghost. Harry had read that too. Move along," McGonagall said, and they moved. But before they got to the great doors, a different sort of stir ran through the group. Harry heard his name before he turned, not spoken, whispered, "Potter, that's Potter, is that really him?" Rippling through the first years in a wave, and then through the crowd of older students visible through the slightly open doors, the whisper spreading and amplifying, the way Harry had imagined fire moved through dry grass. He had known it would happen. Diana had prepared him for it, matter-of-factly. "You will be recognized. People will react in ways that have nothing to do with you. Try to be patient." He found patience easier than most people might, because he had spent a decade being trained by women who understood the difference between what was worth reacting to and what wasn't. He kept walking. In the corridor just outside the Great Hall, a boy stepped sideways and placed himself in Harry's path with the casual ownership of someone accustomed to having space made for him. He was pale and blonde, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if something cold hadn't taken up residence behind the eyes. "Harry Potter," the boy said, and the way he said it was both a greeting and a kind of challenge, a social move Harry recognized from stories about courts and hierarchies. He was staking a claim. "I will be the one who speaks to you first. I matter here." "That's me," Harry said, and kept walking. The boy stepped sideways again, keeping himself in the way. Harry stopped and looked at him. "Draco Malfoy," the boy said. His tone suggested this should mean something. "Hello," Harry said, a beat. Malfoy had clearly expected more reaction. He recalibrated quickly. Harry could watch the adjustment happening and glanced at Ron, then back. "You'll find some families are better than others to associate with," he said. "I can help you navigate that." Harry looked at him steadily. "Ron's been helping me navigate just fine, thanks." Malfoy's expression flickered. The cold thing behind his eyes sharpened. "Weasley," he said, with the particular inflection that was meant to communicate everything he thought about that name in one syllable. "Malfoy," Ron said, with the particular inflection of someone who has heard that tone their entire life and has made his peace with hating it. Harry looked at Malfoy for a moment longer, not with hostility, just with the specific quality of attention Antiope had spent years refining in him. Assessment. He took in the posture, the expression, the careful calibration of the insult and understood something. This boy was performing confidence. He had been taught to perform it very well, but the performance wasn't the same as the thing itself. And in the gap between the two, Harry could see something that looked like genuine anxiety running underneath. "See you inside," Harry said and walked around him. The Sorting Hat was singing when they filed into the Great Hall. Harry had read about this too, but reading about a great hall with enchanted ceilings that reflected the night sky, and 1,000 floating candles, and 4 long tables of students in colored robes, was not the same as standing in it. The ceiling was what got him, not the candles, not the noise, not the eyes of several hundred people turning toward the first years in the time-honored tradition of looking at the new ones. It was the ceiling, just the ceiling, which was the actual sky, complete with actual clouds moving across it, and he stood in the middle of it for just a moment and looked up and let it be extraordinary. Then he looked back down because he had been taught to always look back down. The hat finished singing to moderate applause. McGonagall produced a list. They went alphabetically. Harry stood and watched. Hermione went up, Hermione Granger, who sat completely still in the chair and waited with the focused patience of someone not afraid of the result, and the hat took a surprisingly long moment before announcing Gryffindor. She walked to the table with her chin up, and Harry felt, even from across the room, that she had been putting on less of a performance of certainty than he'd thought. Neville went up. The hat took even longer with Neville, long enough that a few students started to murmur, and Neville sat there with the same expression he'd had in the boat, braced, until the hat finally shouted Gryffindor, and the relief on his face was so total it was almost painful to look at. Ron went. Gryffindor almost before he sat down. The red table erupted with the noise of a family welcoming someone home, which it was. "Potter, Harry." The whisper went through the hall like a stone through water. The ripples reached the staff table. Harry saw several heads turn, several postures change, and he walked up through the silence with his hands loose at his sides, the way Diana walked into rooms she didn't know, and sat down in the chair. The hat dropped over his eyes. Darkness. Then a voice, dry and thoughtful, speaking directly into his head. "Well," said the hat, "this is different, is it?" Harry thought back. "I've sorted many children. I've sorted descendants of founders, children of heroes, heirs to dark legacies. I have not sorted a child raised on the Themyscira." A pause, and Harry had the impression of something very old and very intelligent turning him like a stone in its hand, examining every face. "Extraordinary mind, sharp and curious, that's Ravenclaw, but you'd waste yourself there. I think you're not interested in knowledge for its own sake, you're interested in what it's for." Fair, Harry thought, Hufflepuff would be wasted on you. Not because you can't be loyal, you're almost pathologically loyal actually, but because you don't need a house to teach you what loyalty costs. You already know. Another pause. Slytherin would interest you, real ambition there, not the petty kind. You don't care about status or power as ends in themselves, but the ambition of someone who wants to be genuinely capable. They'd sharpen you, they'd try, Harry agreed. The hat made a sound that was very close to a laugh. And there's the thing, isn't it? Gryffindor then. I was hoping you'd say that, Harry admitted. Your mother was the same. She sat here and told me to hurry up. A warmth in the voice now brief and real. Take care of yourself, Harry Potter. The next 7 years are going to be interesting. The hat lifted. Gryffindor, the red table's noise was extraordinary. Harry walked toward it and caught Hermione's eye first. She was clapping with her particular controlled intensity, then Ron's, who was doing something between waving and windmilling that was deeply enthusiastic. Neville was simply beaming. Harry sat down, he looked up at the staff table, found the headmaster without difficulty. Dumbledore was everything the portraits and descriptions had suggested, enormously tall, silver-haired, with a beard of considerable ambition and half-moon spectacles that he was currently looking over at Harry with an expression of benign welcome that had something else underneath it. Something watchful. Something that was taking careful stock. Harry met his eyes and held them, the way Hippolyta had taught him, not aggressively, not submissively, but simply present, simply clear. I see you seeing me. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression. He smiled, small and genuine, and looked away. The feast was everything food had been described as being, which was substantial. Harry ate well and observed the hall with the comfortable attention of someone who was interested in where they were without being overwhelmed by it. Around him, Gryffindor table was loud and warm and chaotic in the best way. Ron and his brothers were at different tables, but kept exchanging looks that communicated entire conversations across the room. Hermione was absorbing her surroundings with the systematic attention of a researcher at a new field site. Neville had relaxed into something close to happiness, and was talking to a girl with long red hair about his herbology books. The ghost, nearly headless Nick, drifted over and inquired as to Harry's impressions of the castle, which Harry answered honestly and at some length, because the ghost was clearly delighted by genuine interest and Harry saw no reason not to be genuinely interested. By the end of the feast, Nick was suggesting a complete tour of the more obscure staircases, which Harry agreed to with an enthusiasm that made Hermione produce a small notebook. I'll come too, she said. Obviously, Harry said. The food vanished and Dumbledore rose and the hall quieted. Welcome, Dumbledore said, and his voice was the voice of a man who understood how rooms worked, how sound moved, how to make 600 people feel simultaneously included in something and individually seen. Welcome to another year at Hogwarts. To our new students, you have arrived somewhere extraordinary and you will leave 7 years from now somewhere else, the somewhere else being yourselves, which is the only destination that ever truly matters. Harry listened carefully. The man had a gift for language, not just rhetoric, but the specific skill of making complex things sound inevitable. It was a form of power and one worth respecting. A few start-of-term notices, Dumbledore continued. The forest on the grounds is forbidden. Mr. Filch has asked me to remind all students that magic in corridors is prohibited, and the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to all students who do not wish to die a particularly unpleasant death. The hall went slightly quiet. He said that, Ron muttered, kind of casually. He did, Harry agreed. He looked at the third-floor corridor in his mental map of the school, made a note. The feast broke up and the prefects appeared to usher the first years upstairs. Their Gryffindor prefects were a 7th-year boy with a steady voice and easy authority, and a girl who moved like she'd memorized the castle floor plan and probably had. Harry followed with the group through moving staircases that took a moment of adjustment. He had read about this, but again, reading about staircases that simply decided to go somewhere else was not the same as standing on one when it did. He moved with it without grabbing anything. Ron grabbed the railing. Hermione made a sound of controlled alarm and then immediately looked annoyed at herself for making it. Do they do this all the time? Neville asked. Always have, apparently, the prefect said. You'll learn their habits. Or learn to not need habits, Harry thought, and watched the staircase swing into its new position with the quiet satisfaction of someone who liked the idea of a building with opinions. The Gryffindor common room was red and gold and firelit, with armchairs and notice boards and a portrait of a large woman in a pink dress who was the fat lady and who welcomed them in with the particular warmth of someone proud of where they lived. The dormitories were up a spiral staircase, round rooms with 4-poster beds and thick hangings and windows that looked out over the grounds toward the dark lake. Harry went to his assigned bed and sat on it for a moment. The mattress was good. The hangings were heavy red velvet. Through the window the grounds lay under starlight. He pulled out his quill and his first sheet of parchment. Diana, he wrote, arrived safely, sorted into Gryffindor, which felt right. The castle is real and old in a specific way. You'd like the architecture, I think. I've made friends. Their names are Ron, Hermione, and Neville. Ron is from a large wizarding family and is funny without trying to be. Hermione reads everything and gets annoyed when she hasn't read a thing yet. Neville is braver than he thinks he is. I met a boy called Draco Malfoy who tried to manage me in the entrance corridor. I think he's frightened of something, though he hides it well. Dumbledore watched me at dinner the way Hippolyta watches the harbor when a storm is coming. I think he's decided I'm something to manage. He'll find that interesting to try. The food is excellent. Tell Antiope the staircases move, she would like that tactically. I miss you. I'll write more on Sunday, Harry. He sealed it and left it for Athena, who was perched on the bedpost regarding the room with the expression of someone deciding whether the accommodations were adequate. He scratched her under the chin, and she pushed her head against his hand, softening. Ron came up from the bathrooms and dropped onto his own bed with the specific bonelessness of someone who had been awake too long. Day one, he said at the ceiling. Day one, Harry agreed. You're not nervous at all, are you? Ron said, not accusatory, curious. Harry thought about it honestly. Number are you? A bit. My brothers keep telling me stories about Hogwarts, Fred and George mostly. He paused. They're not always what you'd call reassuring stories. I'll look forward to meeting them, Harry said. Ron laughed, sudden and genuine. They're going to love you, actually. He sounded slightly rueful about this. You walked past Malfoy like he was a lamppost. They're going to properly love you, Harry smiled. Get some sleep. I want to see the whole castle before breakfast tomorrow. That's not, Ron started, then seemed to decide this was probably not a battle. Fine, but if a staircase drops us somewhere terrible, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. The castle revealed itself over the first days the way all old things revealed themselves, slowly, on its own terms, giving up its secrets in the order it chose rather than the order you wanted. Harry explored it systematically and joyfully, dragging Ron and sometimes Hermione with him through the parts that weren't off-limits, learning the personalities of the staircases, discovering which suits of armor had been polished recently and which had been ignored, finding 3 rooms that weren't on any map he'd found but whose doors opened when he asked them nicely. He did ask them nicely. He wasn't sure it made a difference, but it seemed polite. The classes were interesting. Transfiguration was taught by McGonagall, who turned herself into a cat in the first 60 seconds of the first lesson, and then turned back and looked at them all with the expression of someone who had made her point and would be making more. Harry paid close attention. The theory was dense and the practical work finicky, but he had the patience for finicky work. Antiope's sword forms had been nothing but finicky work for years. He turned his match into a needle on the second try. McGonagall looked at him, and noted it in her book without expression. Charms was taught by Professor Flitwick, who was small and enthusiastic and stood on a pile of books and had the specific joy of someone who had been teaching the same thing for decades and still genuinely loved it. Harry liked him immediately. And then there was potions. Professor Snape was tall and dark-haired and moved through the dungeons with the precise economy of motion of someone who was used to working in small spaces with dangerous materials. He had black eyes that were doing something complicated, and Harry clocked it in the first 30 seconds of the first lesson. When Snape looked at him, something moved in those eyes that was neither simple hostility nor simple grief, but a mixture of both things layered over each other in a way that Harry suspected the man himself probably didn't fully understand. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a decade and had gotten very good at pretending the weight was a choice. Mr. Potter, Snape said in the roll call, and his voice on the name was like pressing a bruise. Our new celebrity. Harry looked at him. Professor, he said, just that polite, direct, no challenge in it and no retreat. Snape looked back. Something moved in his expression that wasn't quite what he'd expected to see, Harry thought. He continued the roll. The questions came. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood? Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? And Harry answered 2 of the 3 correctly. Hermione, who had her hand up for all 3 and was called on for none of them, contained her frustration with admirable self-control. Sit down, Miss Granger, Snape said, for the 3rd time, and there was something in his tone that wasn't quite dismissal. More like he was watching her too, filing things away. After class in the corridor, Hermione fell into step beside Harry. I knew all the answers, she said. I know, Harry said. He wasn't going to call on me. Number, that's not, she pressed her lips together. That's not about the answers, is it? It's about making a point. Yes, Harry said. He was making a point at me. He just used you to do it. She considered this. That's worse, actually. Yes. Harry shifted his bag on his shoulder. Also, 2 of his 3 questions were from Magical Drafts and Potions, Chapter 4, if you want to look them up. She stopped walking, looked at him. You knew the answers and didn't put your hand up. I was watching him, Harry said simply. A pause, then Hermione laughed, a real one, slightly surprised, almost reluctant. You're quite strange, she said. I've been told. The thing about Quidditch, Harry decided, was that everyone treated it like it was the most complicated thing in the world, when really it was just flying fast and paying attention to more than one thing at once. He had been flying since he was 6. Diana had found him a broom in the Aegean, a clean sweep through an intermediary, because she understood that some kinds of joy were worth the risk, and flying was clearly one of those kinds for him. He had spent 5 years in the Themysciran air being spectacular and unconcerned about it, and when Madame Hooch lined them all up on the grounds on a cold September morning and set up in half the class's brooms either leapt into their hands or refused to move at all, Harry's came up before she finished the word. He didn't draw attention to it. He just held the broom and waited. Neville's broom wouldn't come up. Then it shot up sideways and Neville, rather than letting go, grabbed it and was dragged into the air in a way that was more commitment than skill. He went up fast, shrieking, then the broom leveled at 15 feet and started drifting toward the castle. Harry was already in the air. He went up hard and fast, closing the distance in seconds, coming in alongside Neville's broom with the easy precision of someone who had done this in worse conditions over open water. He grabbed the broom's tail to slow it, pulled alongside, and said, "Let go on 3 and I'll catch you." Neville, white-faced and gripping the broom so hard his knuckles had gone completely bloodless, managed to look at him. "That is not a reassuring plan." 3, Harry said, and Neville let go and Harry caught him by the wrist and brought them both down in a controlled descent that ended with Neville standing on the ground again, shaking, and Harry landing beside him like he'd simply stepped off a step. Below, the class was applauding. Madame Hooch was striding toward them with the expression of someone caught between relief and professional irritation. Harry turned around and found Draco Malfoy had used the distraction to pick up something from the grass near where Neville had been standing. He recognized it, a small glass ball, Neville's Remembrall, a gift from his grandmother. "I'll give that back," Harry said, walking over. Malfoy looked at him. There was that cold expression, and underneath it, that thing Harry had noticed before, the anxiety running like a current under the performance. "It's just a Remembrall," Malfoy said. "Longbottom doesn't need Draco," Harry said, keeping his voice completely even. "Give it back." Something in the way he said it, not threatening, not loud, just completely sure of how this was going to end, made Malfoy go still for a moment. Then, with an expression that was trying to be disdainful and landing closer to uncertain, he dropped the ball. Harry caught it before it hit the ground. He handed it to Neville. "Mr. Potter," Madame Hooch said, arriving behind him. "That was excellent flying and a serious breach of protocol. No one is to be in the air without instruction." "I know," Harry said, turning to face her. "I apologize. Neville was in danger and I responded." He met her eyes. "I'd do it again." She looked at him for a moment. He could see the professional objection fighting the human recognition that the answer was correct. "See me after," she said finally, and moved on. Professor McGonagall appeared at his elbow approximately 45 seconds later. Harry had been half expecting this. "A word, Mr. Potter," she said, with the expression of someone composing their face against something, and took him aside. She looked at him for a moment. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" "The Aegean," Harry said. "I've been flying since I was 6. "You have natural seeker's reflexes," she said. "More than natural," she paused, composing herself further. "I would like to talk to the Gryffindor Quidditch captain about you." "I'd like that," Harry said, something softened infinitesimally in her expression. "The flying itself was quite something," she said, and walked away before he could respond. Ron, who had witnessed all of this from approximately 4 feet away, let out a breath. "You," he said, "are going to be the Gryffindor seeker." "Probably," Harry said, "in the first year." Which apparently hasn't happened in a century. McGonagall didn't mention the century part specifically. "I'm extrapolating," Ron said. He looked at Neville, who was still holding the Remembrall and had the expression of someone recalibrating several things. "You all right?" "I think so," Neville said. He looked at Harry. "Thank you." "Of course," Harry said. He meant it simply. "You helped people when they needed help. This was not complicated." Word moved through Hogwarts the way water moved through cracks, finding every space, expanding as it went. By the end of September, everyone in the school knew that the first-year Gryffindor had extraordinary Quidditch reflexes, that he had faced down Draco Malfoy on his first day and again on the grounds without raised voices or any particular drama, that he was consistently at the top of charms and near the top of everything else, and that there was something about him that was just different, not in a way people could easily articulate. They tried. "He's very confident, he's very calm, he doesn't seem scared of anything, there's something about his eyes," but none of those things quite captured it. What they were picking up on, Harry knew if he thought about it, was the absence of something. The absence of the performance of being Harry Potter. He wasn't playing a role, wasn't managing his image, wasn't trying to be what anyone expected of him. He was just himself, and that turned out to be more unsettling than any performance would have been, because people could argue with performances and they didn't quite know what to do with the real thing. Draco Malfoy, specifically, didn't know what to do with it. They kept intersecting at mealtimes, in corridors, in class, and every time Malfoy deployed a different approach. Condescension, provocation, social maneuvering, an attempt to get Ron to say something Harry would have to defend. Harry met each one the same way, directly, without drama, without either aggression or retreat, and with a particular quality of patience that Malfoy clearly found more irritating than anything else could have been. "He wants you to react," Hermione said one evening in the common room. "He's used to people either becoming frightened of him or angry at him. You're doing neither." "I know," Harry said. He was reading his Transfiguration text, or had been. "He's working out what I am." "And what are you?" Ron asked over his chess board. Harry considered this. "Someone he doesn't have a category for," he said. "That's uncomfortable for people whose whole sense of order depends on categories." Hermione looked at him over her own book, then, apparently deciding this was worth a response. "That's either very perceptive or very self-satisfied." "Can't it be both?" Harry said. Ron laughed. Hermione made a sound that was almost a laugh, which for Hermione was practically the same thing. Outside, the Hogwarts grounds settled into autumn, and the lake went dark and deep. And somewhere in the castle, a three-headed dog breathed behind a locked door and guarded something important. And Harry Potter read his Transfiguration text and thought about everything and nothing and felt, for the first time in his life, something he would have called homesick, except that it wasn't for Themyscira. It was for something he hadn't had yet. Something that he was starting to understand, being built right here in this room with these three people. It felt very much like the beginning of something. Chapter 3, Blood and Bronze. The first Quidditch practice of Harry's life happened on a Thursday morning in early October, before the sun had fully committed to rising. Oliver Wood had the energy of someone who had been waiting his entire Quidditch career for this specific Thursday, and expressed it by meeting Harry at 5:30 in the morning outside the common room with a broom in one hand and a box under his arm, and a look on his face that communicated he had been awake since at least 3 thinking about formations. "You're punctual," Wood said, slightly surprised. "I'm always punctual," Harry said. He had been awake since 5, which was sleeping in by Themysciran standards. They went down to the pitch in the grey pre-dawn, dew on the grass, the castle at their backs still lit with its quiet internal glow. Wood opened the box and laid out the balls with the reverence of someone handling things they considered sacred. He explained each one with the thoroughness of a man who assumed the person he was talking to knew nothing, which was occasionally frustrating but Harry found charming in a specific way. The enthusiasm behind it was genuine. "The snitch," Wood said, holding up the small golden ball. It was trying to escape his fingers already, wings flickering with mechanical eagerness. "You catch this, we win, 150 points, and the game ends. Everything else, chasers, bludgers, scoring, everything else is secondary to you catching that snitch." He fixed Harry with a very serious look. "Understood," caught, Harry said. Wood blinked. "What?" Harry pointed. The snitch had escaped Wood's grip during the explanation, and Harry had taken it out of the air with his left hand without looking, the same way he'd been taking things out of the air since he was 8, and Antiope had made him practice catching thrown blades by the handle. He held it up. It struggled between his fingers. Wood stared at it, then at Harry, then back at it. "How can we go up?" Harry asked. "I'd rather learn from the air than the ground." They went up. Harry flew the way he always flew, with his whole body, feeling the broom through his hands and his core rather than just gripping it, making adjustments with weight and balance rather than overcorrecting with his arms. Wood ran him through turns and dives and reversal maneuvers with increasing disbelief. And then they released the snitch and Harry tracked it for 12 minutes before catching it, which Wood apparently considered extraordinary but Harry found frustrating because he'd lost it twice behind the south goalpost, and that was a sightline issue he needed to fix. 12 minutes, Wood kept saying on the ground afterward. 12 minutes for a first-year who's never played a real. "I've been flying for 5 years, Harry said. "I just haven't competed. It's different." "How is it different?" Harry thought about it. "In practice you can go anywhere you want. In a game you have to account for other people." He looked across the pitch. "What do the bludgers actually feel like when they hit you?" Wood looked at him with the expression of a captain who had just found something very rare and was slightly afraid it was going to injure itself. "Terrible," he said. "They feel terrible." "Right," Harry said. "I'll need to learn to read them. Can we practice with bludgers on Saturday?" "Yes," Wood said immediately. "Yes, absolutely we can. Are you always like this?" "Like what?" Like Wood gestured vaguely at Harry's general existence. "Like this," Harry considered. "I think so," he said. Ron was at breakfast when Harry got back, eating with the specific dedication of someone making up for being awake too early by consuming everything in reach. He looked up when Harry sat down. "How was practice?" "Good, we'll see how the real thing feels." Harry poured himself tea. "Wood is very enthusiastic." "Wood breathes Quidditch," Ron said. "He once made Fred and George practice in a thunderstorm. Fred said lightning hit a goalpost and Wood called it atmospheric interference and kept going." He paused. "Is that true or is Fred embellishing?" "Probably both," Harry said. Hermione came down 5 minutes later, already reading, with a piece of toast in her hand and her bag over her shoulder, and sat down in the specific way of someone who has a plan for the day and intends to stick to it. She looked up from her book long enough to take in Harry's still damp hair and the faint mud on his boots. "You were on the pitch already. Practice," Harry said, "at 5 in the morning. 5:30. She made the sound that meant she disapproved but was choosing her battles and went back to her book. Harry ate his breakfast and watched the hall fill with students, the morning noise building gradually from the pre-dawn quiet of a few early risers to the full roar of a school day beginning. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching him, not looking, watching. Harry caught the look and held it briefly, the same way he'd held Dumbledore's gaze at the feast, and Malfoy looked away first. Not because he was beaten, because he was still working something out. Harry went back to his eggs and thought about bludger trajectories. Defense against the dark arts was a double lesson on Wednesdays, which meant an hour and a half of Professor Quirrell. Harry had formed an impression of Quirrell on the first day that he'd been quietly revising ever since. The initial read was obvious and had clearly been designed to be obvious: the stammer, the turban, the jumpy quality, the expression of perpetual mild alarm. People saw it and categorized him immediately: nervous, ineffectual, harmless. Harry had grown up with women who believed that the most dangerous things in the world were often the ones that looked harmless, and so he paid a different kind of attention in Quirrell's class. The stammer was consistent but not entirely natural. There were moments, brief ones, when a sentence came out too clean before the stutter reasserted itself, like someone remembering a performance they were supposed to be giving. The eyes were wrong too. Frightened eyes moved around rooms looking for escape routes. Quirrell's eyes moved around rooms cataloging them, which was a different thing entirely. Harry said nothing about this to anyone, not yet. He didn't have enough information, and speculation without evidence was something Hermione had strong feelings about that he had found himself mostly agreeing with. What he did was pay attention. "Tea today," Quirrell said at the front of the class. "We will be discussing the theory of defensive counter-jinxes. If you would all open your books to page 49, Professor," Harry said, not rudely, just clearly raising his hand. "Are we going to do any practical work this term?" Quirrell looked at him. The flutter of alarm in his expression was immediate and practiced. "Practical work is best approached after thorough theoretical grounding, Mr. Potter." "I understand. I'm asking because the theory in chapters 1 through 3 is fairly straightforward, and it might be useful to see how it performs practically. Learning what a shield charm feels like from the inside seems like it would help people understand the theory better." Around him, the class was very still, the specific stillness of students watching someone say something to a teacher that no one else would have said. Quirrell looked at him for a moment that was slightly too long. "Perhaps later in the term," he said. "Of course," Harry said, and opened his book to page 49. After class, Ron fell into step beside him in the corridor. "Are you trying to make every teacher either love you or hate you?" "I'm asking reasonable questions," Harry said. "Snape already hates you." "Snape doesn't hate me. He has complicated feelings about me that he's processing through hostility. That's different." Ron stared at him. "You're the strangest person I've ever met, and I grew up in a house with Fred and George." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It wasn't one," Ron said, then immediately, "Actually, it sort of was. Did you notice anything weird about Quirrell in class?" Harry looked at him. "What do you think you noticed?" Ron frowned, working through it. He had good instincts. Harry had been noticing, not academic instincts, not the formal reasoning that Hermione ran through everything, but something more intuitive, a feel for when something was off. He just wasn't always confident about trusting it. "The stammer," Ron said slowly, "it goes away when he's not thinking about it and comes back when he is, like it's something he's doing, not something that just happens." "Yes," Harry said. Ron blinked. "You noticed too, on the first day, and you haven't told anyone. I'm telling you now." "Why not before?" Harry lifted a shoulder. "You'd only just worked it out yourself. You needed to get there without me." Ron was quiet for a second, then made a sound that might have been irritation or might have been the opposite. "You're going to be very annoying to be friends with, aren't you?" "Probably," Harry said, "but useful." October deepened into itself, growing cold and golden, and Hogwarts settled into the rhythms of a school in full operation. Classes and meals and homework, and the low-grade social complexity of several hundred children learning to coexist. The fat lady's portrait was the center of late evenings in Gryffindor, and the common room acquired the warmth of a room that is genuinely lived in, with half-finished chess games on low tables and books wedged into sofa cushions, and someone almost always at the fire. Harry did his homework with focused efficiency, not because it was easy exactly, but because he had grown up reading everything he could find and had a particular relationship with study, which was that it was a tool and tools should be used correctly. He helped Ron with the parts Ron found grinding. and asked Hermione questions he already knew the answers to because she lit up when she got to explain things properly. And when Neville struggled with his Transfiguration homework, Harry sat with him for an hour and worked through it step by step with the patience of someone who genuinely didn't mind. "You're good at teaching," Neville said after a session that had ended with Neville successfully turning his stone into a passable match. "Diana taught me," Harry said. "She was always very patient when I didn't get something right away. She just tried a different angle." Neville looked at his match. "What's she like?" Harry thought about how to answer that. The usual answers, extraordinary, remarkable, 3,000 years old, were true but didn't quite catch it. "She's the most capable person I know," he said, "and also the kindest, both of those things at the same time without either one making the other less." He paused. "She taught me that strength is worthless if it doesn't know what it's for." Neville turned this over. "My Gran says something like that," he said. "She says courage without cause is just recklessness." "Your Gran sounds like she knows what she's talking about." Neville smiled, a real one, still slightly surprised every time something good happened, like he was waiting for the universe to correct a mistake. "She's a bit terrifying, actually." "The good ones usually are," Harry said. The letters between Harry and Diana had their own rhythm now. His every Sunday, hers arriving on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, rolled tight and sealed with blue wax in the shape of a star, smelling faintly of the island. He read them carefully and carried the feeling of them with him for a day or two afterward. She wrote about the island. Antiope had taken on 2 new students. The Eastern Vineyard had had a good harvest. His grandmother Hippolyta had sent her regards and was reading a book about modern Muggle history and had opinions about the 20th century that were extensive and largely correct. She wrote about the world, things in the League, things in the broader world that he should know, a reminder that the wizarding world was connected to everything and not separate from it the way it sometimes liked to think. She wrote in October's second letter, "You mentioned the 3rd-floor corridor in your first week's letter. I looked into it through some contacts. Be careful, Harry. There are things in that castle that are not school business. You'll know it when you find it. Trust your instincts, not just your information." He had written back, "I think I already know what it is. I think it's a stone." Her reply had been brief, "Then be patient. Let it come to you." He was being patient. He was also, quietly and systematically, learning everything the Hogwarts library had on Nicholas Flamel, which was almost nothing, which told him more than a full entry would have. The troll happened on Halloween's. Harry had been looking forward to Halloween in a specific way, not for the celebrations, though the Great Hall decorated with 1,000 carved pumpkins and real bats was genuinely impressive, but because October 31st was a date that had its own weight in his life. It was the day his parents had died. It was the day Diana had found him. He had always felt both things on this day, held together, the grief and the love occupying the same space without canceling each other out. He had been sitting with Ron and Neville at the feast when Hermione hadn't appeared. "She was upset this afternoon," Neville said quietly when Harry asked. "I think she overheard someone saying she was annoying." It was Ron, he said it to someone outside class." Ron had gone very still with his fork halfway to his mouth. The tips of his ears went red. "I didn't think he started. She went to the girls' bathroom," Neville said. "I don't think she knows about the feast." Ron put his fork down. He opened his mouth to say something that probably would have been defensive, looked at Harry and closed it again. The red in his ears deepened. He pushed his food around. "That wasn't good of me, was it?" "No," Harry said without cruelty. "It wasn't." "Right." Ron stood up. That was when the doors opened and Professor Quirrell came in at a run, which was notable in itself because Quirrell moved with a very particular controlled economy that Harry had been observing, and actual running was not part of it. "Troll!" Quirrell shouted. "In the dungeon, troll in the dungeon." He appeared to remember something, pressed the back of his hand to his forehead dramatically and fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore called for order with a single wand crack that cut through the noise like a blade. "Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." Harry was already scanning the crowd. "Hermione doesn't know," he said. "She's in the girls' bathroom. On the 2nd floor." Ron turned to face him. "We have to?" "Yes," Harry said. They went against the current, the entire student body moving toward them as they pushed through, heading back toward the doors while everyone else fled through them, which required a certain amount of physical creativity. Harry moved through the crowd the way he moved through everything, finding the spaces and using them, Ron at his shoulder doing his best to keep up. The corridors were empty in the specific haunted way of large buildings suddenly evacuated. Their footsteps echoed. The torches threw long shadows. Somewhere below them, something was happening that was creating a low rhythmic impact on the stone floor, heavy and regular. They found the bathroom first. Harry pushed the door open. "Hermione, there's a troll in the building, we need to go." Hermione came out of the stall she'd been in, red-eyed and startled, her expression cycling through surprise and embarrassment and the reassertion of composure in about 2 seconds. "A what?" The far wall of the bathroom exploded inward. The troll was 12 feet tall and moved with the ambling, purposeless energy of something that was dangerous not because it was intelligent, but because it was enormous and there was no space in its world for the concept of collateral damage. It dragged its club through the wall as it came in, and sinks shattered and plumbing burst and water began pouring across the tile floor and the troll shook debris from its head and turned to look at the three small things in the room with it. Hermione screamed and pressed back against the wall. Ron grabbed a sink for balance. Harry looked at the troll, 12 feet. Thick neck, small eyes, the club dragging behind it already gathering momentum for an upswing. He ran the geometry in his head. The space was too small for the club to have full arc, that was good, and the troll's eyes tracked movement more than stillness, that was also good, and trolls had poor fine motor articulation but extraordinary gross strength, which meant the danger was proximity, which meant he stepped left and said, loudly and clearly, "Hey." The troll's eyes went to him. The club started its upswing. Harry was already moving. He went right low toward the troll's legs rather than away from them, which was counterintuitive and therefore correct, because the club was swinging where he had been. He felt the air displacement as it passed above him. He rolled under the swing and came up on the troll's right side, and with the particular economy of motion that 5 years of Antiope's training had made instinct, drove his elbow hard into the back of the troll's right knee. The joint buckled. The troll made a sound that was less a roar and more a bellow of pure confusion. Nothing had ever been small enough to get to its knee before, and went down on that side, club crashing into the tile. "Wand's out," Harry said. "It's down, use it, Wingardium Leviosa." The club. Ron had his wand up. His face was white but his arm was steady. The levitation charm left the club in the air, not perfectly, it was wobbling, but it was away from the troll's hand. Hermione had stopped screaming and had her wand aimed as well. The troll heaved itself back up. Harry was already in its blind spot. He had done this, not with trolls specifically, but with larger opponents specifically. Because Antiope had always said, if something is bigger than you, the geometry changes, and you have to change with it. He stayed inside the swing radius, inside the place where size was a disadvantage rather than an advantage, moving with the troll rather than away from it. And each time it tried to turn, he turned with it. And the troll was getting genuinely agitated now, confused and off balance, its coordination deteriorating. "Its eyes," he said. Simple blinding charm, flash. He heard Hermione's wand work behind him, precise and sharp, and brilliant white light filled the bathroom. And the troll roared and swung wild and blind, and Harry stepped back, planted his feet, and drove the heel of his palm into the troll's chin with everything Antiope's training had built into him. The troll's head snapped back. It sat down very heavily. It blinked several times, less with aggression than with profound confusion. Then it listed sideways and hit the floor with an impact that cracked the tiles. It was not dead, it was unconscious and would have a significant headache, but it was alive. The bathroom was destroyed. Water was everywhere. Half the sinks were rubble. The troll was snoring on the floor. Harry straightened, rolled his shoulder to check it. Fine, he'd had worse, and turned around. Ron was still holding his wand up, even though there was nothing left to point it at. Hermione had her back against the far wall, her wand arm at her side, staring at Harry with an expression he recognized as the specific look of a person whose internal model of the world has just been significantly revised. "Are you hurt?" Harry asked. "No," Hermione said. Her voice was perfectly steady, which he respected enormously. "Ron, I'm number." Ron lowered his wand. "What the bloody hell, what was that?" "Troll," Harry said. "I know what it was." "I meant what you," Ron gestured at the unconscious 12-foot pile of troll. "You hit it with your hand. You ran at a troll and hit it with your hand." "It was the most efficient option," Harry said. "The room was too small for it to use the club properly. I just needed to get inside the kill radius," Hermione said quietly. "You went inside the kill radius of a mountain troll. It worked." "It worked," she repeated, and her voice had a quality to it that was either disbelief or the beginning of something else. She looked at him for a moment, that frank, assessing look that missed nothing. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Antiope," Harry said. "My Diana's aunt, she trained me." "For how long?" 6 years. Hermione absorbed this, looked at the troll, looked at Harry. "Right," she said, and for the second time he heard her file something away in some internal system, some catalog that she was constantly updating. "Right, okay." The door burst open and 3 professors came in, McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell, and stopped dead. McGonagall looked at the troll, the destroyed bathroom, the 3 first-year students standing in it, the troll on the floor. She looked at all of this with the measured silence of a woman with 30 years of experience, confronting situations her training had not prepared her for. "Explain," she said. They explained. Ron and Hermione talked. Harry filled in details when the account went vague. Through it all, Quirrell stood slightly behind the others and said nothing, and Harry felt that particular quality of attention on him, not the attention of a frightened man, but the attention of a man watching something and deciding what it meant. Snape was looking at Harry's right shoulder with a furrowed expression. Harry glanced down. There was a small tear in his robe at the shoulder seam. The club's air displacement had been closer than he'd indicated. Nothing had connected, but the wind off a troll's swing was apparently considerable. He looked up and found Snape's black eyes on his. There was something different in Snape's expression from its usual complicated mix, something less like hostility and more like someone being made deeply uncomfortable by a feeling they didn't want to have. 5 points from Gryffindor for leaving the dormitories, McGonagall said, and then almost immediately with the air of someone correcting course while the course was still under them. And 10 points to each of you for the presence of mind and practical application. She paused. This never happened, she added, apparently to herself. Quirrell coughed. Should we not commend the students more fully, Professor, facing a troll at their age? Thank you, Quirinus, McGonagall said, with an iciness that suggested the conversation was over. They went back to the common room. The feast had been abandoned, students returned to their houses, and Gryffindor Tower was buzzing with speculation. Harry, Ron, and Hermione came in together and said almost nothing and sat together at the fire, and there was something different in the way they sat closer, easier, the particular proximity of people who have been through something together and come out the other side as something new. Ron cleared his throat. Hermione, he said. Earlier, what I said I was being a prat and I didn't think you'd. He stopped. Tried again. I'm sorry. Hermione looked at him. Something in her face shifted, the composed certainty softening into something more honest. Thank you, she said. She said it simply without making him work for it, which Harry suspected was something she'd had to learn to do and had done well. Ron nodded, deeply relieved. Harry looked at the fire. Outside the common room windows, the November wind was picking up, driving the first sharp edge of real cold across the grounds. Inside, the fire was warm. He thought about what Quirrell had done, arriving late, fainting dramatically, drawing all attention forward. He thought about the troll, which didn't belong in a school any more than a weapon belonged in a library. He thought about what you'd want everyone looking at if you were doing something on a different floor entirely. The third floor, he thought, someone had wanted everyone looking at the dungeon. He said nothing about this, not yet. November brought Quidditch. Harry's first match, Gryffindor versus Slytherin, was on a Saturday morning in bright, cold sunshine that made the lake look like hammered silver and turned the stands into a wall of color and noise. He had practiced through the whole of October, learned the bludgers and the formations and the particular psychology of a real game as opposed to solitary flying, and he stood in the changing room beforehand and listened to Wood's pre-match speech with the calm of someone who has been trained for battle and knows the difference between real fear and preparation. You all right? Ron asked in the stands. He and Hermione and Neville had claimed seats behind the Gryffindor goalposts, and Ron had arrived wearing so many Gryffindor scarves he looked like he was being absorbed by one. Ask me after, Harry said, and went out onto the pitch. The crowd was extraordinary, the noise of it physical, something you felt in your chest. Harry flew to his starting position and looked across at the Slytherin team and found Draco Malfoy looking back at him from the Slytherin stands, and their eyes met and held for a moment that communicated nothing either of them wanted to say out loud. And then Madame Hooch blew her whistle and the balls were released and the match began. The first 10 minutes, Harry did what he always did in a new aerial environment, read it. Flew figure eights, got a feel for the wind across the pitch, tracked the bludger patterns and the chaser movements and built a picture of the whole space. It looked, he knew, like he was doing nothing, and he heard the crowd's impatience building. What's he doing? Why isn't he going after it and let it build? Because the crowd's opinion was not relevant information. He saw the snitch at 11 minutes and 40 seconds, hovering near the ground at the Slytherin end, gold glint against green grass. He went hard and straight, and the Slytherin seeker, bigger, older, on a better broom, was further away and half a second behind. One of the bludgers came at him from the right, and he adjusted his angle by 6 degrees without breaking his dive, felt it pass his shoulder close enough to move his hair, and reached out his left hand and closed it on gold. The whistle. The roar. He held the snitch up and the gold wings beat against his fingers, and the sound from the Gryffindor stands was the sound of several hundred people at the absolute top of their capacity for joy. Harry smiled, not at the stands, not at the crowd, just into the cold, bright air. A private smile for nobody, for the specific feeling of having done something exactly right. He landed and Ron crashed into him from somewhere lateral, and Neville was behind Ron, and Hermione was arriving with an expression of suppressed delight that was losing the fight with her composure rapidly, and the team was shouting, and Wood was doing something that might have been a victory dance, and Harry stood in the middle of all of it and let it be exactly what it was. Good, uncomplicated, real. He glanced toward the staff gallery. McGonagall was applauding with her hands and a precise, restrained smile. Snape was sitting very still with his arms folded and an expression that gave nothing away. Quirrell was watching Harry with those cataloging eyes, not the crowd, not the pitch. Harry specifically. Harry held the snitch a moment longer, then opened his hand and let it go. That evening in the common room, in the noise and warmth of a Gryffindor celebration, Fred and George Weasley materialized on either side of Harry with identical grins that suggested the situation had been planned. Harry Potter, Fred said. Prince of Themyscira, George said. Harry looked at them. Ron's told you about that. Ron tells us everything, Fred confirmed. It's actually one of his better qualities, George added. Keeps us informed. Now question. Important question, Fred said. Very important, George agreed. When you went inside the troll's swing radius, was that something you were trained to do or something you decided to do in the moment? Harry considered them. They had the same quality that Ron had, that Weasley quality of walking through awkwardness rather than around it, of asking the real question rather than the polite one. He liked them immediately and thoroughly. Both, he said. Fred and George looked at each other with the particular communication of people who have been doing it their whole lives. Then back to Harry. We're going to be friends, Fred said. Absolutely unavoidably friends, George confirmed. Wonderful, Harry said and meant it. Ron appeared over George's shoulder. I specifically asked them not to do this, he said to no one. You did, George said pleasantly. It didn't work, Fred added. It never works, Ron agreed with the tone of a man making peace with an eternal truth, and sat down beside Harry and handed him a piece of cake. Harry ate the cake and listened to the twins and watched the fire and let the evening be an evening, good and simple, all edges softened. He was happy. Not in the abstract, not in the philosophical sense, just happy here in this room with these people. He would think about Quirrell and the troll and the third floor tomorrow. Tonight was for this. The fight with Draco happened at the end of November, and it happened because Draco finally ran out of approaches that didn't work and chose the one that couldn't be deflected by calm. It was in the corridor outside the library after dinner, and it started with Draco and his companions, Crabbe, Goyle, and a thin girl named Pansy Parkinson who had sharp eyes, and Ron, who had stopped to retrieve a book he'd left in the library and found Harry waiting. Draco had been working something out for 2 months, and Harry watched him land on it in real time, watched the decision form, saw what was coming before it arrived. I heard your Amazon guardian is a muggle, Draco said. Some sort of island savage. Ron went rigid. Harry looked at Draco. The expression he saw there was not cruelty for its own sake, it was the expression of someone who had run out of other options and was doing something they had been told would work, something that had always worked, deployed now with the quality of a boy whose father had given him a tool and told him it was the right one. She's not a muggle, Harry said. His voice was even. And she's not a savage. My father says your sort, raised outside proper wizarding society by outside people, it shows, it always shows. Draco's chin was up. He was doing the performance of confidence again, but it was running harder than usual, the anxiety closer to the surface. You don't belong here. Harry was quiet for a moment. He took his time because this deserved a real answer, not a quick one. Around them, a few other students had stopped, sensing something the way people sense weather. Your father is afraid, Harry said calmly and clearly. Not of me specifically, of what I represent. Because I was raised outside his system, and I don't need his system's approval to know what I'm worth. And that frightens men like him more than anything else. He kept his gaze on Draco's face, steady and present. I think it frightens you too. But I think the reason for it is different. Draco's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know you're not stupid, Harry said, and I know you've been watching me since the first day trying to work out how I work and you haven't found it yet, and that's bothering you. He tilted his head slightly. For what it's worth, the way you've been raised is not the same as who you are. Those are different things. You can choose which one defines you. Silence. Draco stared at him. The performance had entirely dropped, not in defeat exactly, but in the specific way of someone who had walked into a room expecting a certain kind of fight and found something else entirely. His companions were looking at him for direction and not getting it. Then Draco said, voice quieter and less managed than anything he'd said all term, you're completely serious. I usually am, Harry said, another beat. Then Draco turned and walked away, no exit line, no recovery, just gone, his companions shuffling after him in confused silence. Ron let out a very long breath. That was either the most powerful thing I've ever watched or the most terrifying, I can't decide. Harry looked at the empty corridor. Both, probably. What you said about him being afraid about his father, I meant it, Harry said. He's been told his whole life that people like you and me should be below him, and here we are and we're not. That's a whole worldview coming apart at the seams. He picked up his bag. That's not nothing. It's not an excuse, but it's not nothing. Ron picked up his library book, turning it over in his hands. You think he could change, actually change? I don't know, Harry said honestly. I think he could choose to, whether he does, that's his. They walked back toward the tower in the torchlit quiet of evening corridors, and somewhere above them the castle settled into its nighttime self, older and quieter and full of its own secrets. And Harry thought about choices and inheritance, and the things people become when no one has told them who they're supposed to be. Outside, the first real snow of the year was beginning to fall. Chapter 4. The Mirror and the Maze. December arrived on the back of a cold front that turned the Hogwarts grounds into something from an old painting, white and still and impossibly quiet, the lake frozen at its edges, the forest dark against the snow-like ink on paper. Harry liked the cold. He had grown up on a Mediterranean island, but he had also grown up trained by women who believed that comfort was a thing to be earned rather than assumed. And Antiope's early morning sessions had run through every season the Aegean offered, which included winters that were sharper than they looked. He was one of the few students who went down to the lake before breakfast, walking the shoreline while the rest of the castle slept in, his breath making small clouds in the still air, thinking. He had been doing a lot of thinking. The Flamel problem had gone as far as the library would take it, which was almost nowhere. A single footnote in a 300-year-old alchemical text. A half-sentence in a Transfiguration history that cut off before it got to the point, and the very deliberate absence of anything more substantial, which told Harry that the absence itself was intentional. Someone had curated the Hogwarts library's information on Nicholas Flamel the way you curated a garden, by removing what you didn't want growing there. That told him the stone was real, was here, and was important enough that Dumbledore had taken precautions before anyone knew to look. He thought about Quirrell. The troll on Halloween had been a diversion. He was certain of that now, the way you became certain of things that started as instinct and accumulated evidence. The troll had drawn every adult in the castle to the dungeons. The question was what Quirrell had wanted to do while every adult in the castle was in the dungeons. He thought about the third floor. He hadn't gone. He had decided not to go yet, because Diana's advice, be patient, let it come to you, was advice he trusted, and because walking into something without enough information was the kind of mistake you made once. He was building the picture first. Ron thought he was being overcautious. Hermione thought he was being appropriately methodical. Neville didn't know about any of it yet, though Harry intended to tell him because Neville had instincts worth having in the room. He stopped at the lake's edge and looked at the frozen margin. The castle reflected in the unfrozen center, wavering golden in the early light. His mother had walked here, had stood at this edge and looked at this reflection maybe, had been 11 once and cold and full of questions. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the ice-free water, watching it bounce and sink. Mom, he thought, not for the first time, I'm working on it. The Christmas holidays arrived and drained the castle of most of its students like water from a bath. The trains took them south, the Weasleys in a cheerful pile, Hermione with her parents waiting at King's Cross, most of Gryffindor dorm, and what was left was a school in its undressed form, quieter and somehow more itself. The few students who stayed discovered that Hogwarts without a full complement of pupils was a different animal entirely, echoing and intimate, the staff more visible, the corridors feeling longer. Ron stayed. His brothers were doing something with the twins' extensive network of Hogwarts contacts that required presence on the grounds, and Mrs. Weasley had sent a box of food and 7 jumpers and a letter that Ron read and folded small and kept in his pocket. Harry stayed because there was nowhere else to go. Themyscira was too far for a Christmas visit, a fact that had been discussed and accepted with mutual regret, and also because the emptied castle felt like an opportunity. They had Christmas dinner with 6 other Gryffindors and 2 teachers who materialized briefly and then retreated, and afterward Harry and Ron sat in the common room by the fire with the comfortable silence of people who had gotten past the stage of needing to fill silence. "What are you thinking about?" Ron asked, not looking up from the chessboard he was setting up without an opponent, running through openings, working the patterns. "The mirror," Harry said. He had found it 3 days into the holidays, in a search of the 7th floor that was methodical but not aggressive. He wasn't forcing doors or casting detection charms, just walking corridors that were now empty enough to walk properly, paying the kind of attention to the castle that you paid to old buildings when you wanted to know what they were actually doing versus what they appeared to be doing. It was in a classroom that should have been unused, behind a door that wasn't locked but required you to push it with intention rather than just opening it. He'd felt it before he saw it, the same prickle at the back of his neck that he'd felt on the night he arrived, the sense of something genuinely old and genuinely powerful, and he'd pushed the door and found the room, and in the room the mirror. Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. He had read the inscription backward immediately, out of the habit of a boy who had grown up with women who believed hidden things were worth finding. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He had stood in front of it for a long time. What did you see? Ron asked. He moved a pawn, considered it, moved it back. My mother, Harry said, and my father and Diana and Hippolyta and Antiope. He paused. All in the same place, at the same time. Ron was quiet. It wasn't sad, Harry said, because he knew Ron would expect it to be, or it was a little, but mostly it was just clarifying. It showed me what I already knew, that I want both worlds together, not one or the other. That's different from most people's reactions to it, Ron said carefully. He had gone to look at it himself the second night and had told Harry what he'd seen himself, alone, holding the Quidditch cup and head boy badge. He'd been embarrassed about it and Harry had been matter-of-fact, and that had helped. Diana would say the mirror isn't dangerous unless you let it replace the real thing, Harry said. Information about yourself is only harmful if you run from it instead of using it. Ron moved a bishop. She sounds like someone's mum, Harry smiled. She is. Your mum. My mum, Harry agreed and said it simply because it was simply true. They played chess. Ron won 3 games in a row and Harry let none of them go without genuine effort because Ron played better when challenged and it wasn't a kindness to go easy. Outside, snow fell in big soft flakes that turned the grounds into something gentle and white, and the fire crackled, and the Christmas tree in the corner smelled of pine and the candles on it were real, and the common room felt like exactly the kind of place people meant when they said home. Athena arrived at 11 with Diana's Christmas letter. Harry read it by firelight, Ron tactfully occupied with resetting the chessboard. The letter was longer than usual, 6 pages in Diana's precise, elegant hand, covering the island's Christmas celebrations, a message from Hippolyta, news from the League about some concerning activity in Eastern Europe that wasn't Harry's problem yet but would bear watching, and at the end, in language that was more direct than Diana usually employed in letters. Be careful, Harry. The thing under the school is attracting attention from a direction I haven't been able to fully identify. I have contacts watching. If anything feels wrong, trust that feeling, write to me immediately. There was also a wrapped package at Athena's foot, tied with blue ribbon. Inside was a small carved disc of olive wood, Amazon-made. He recognized the work, probably Antiope, on a cord. He turned it over and found a symbol carved on the back that he recognized as a protection seal, Old Themyscira, the kind that was woven through with the island's particular magic. He put it on. In the morning, amid the noise and chaos of Christmas presents spread across the common room floor, there was also a long, thin parcel for Harry with no note. He unwrapped it and found an invisibility cloak, fine as spider silk, silver as running water, impossible to see through and impossible to see with. He held it and felt the enchantment in it, deep and layered, and knew it was old and knew it was important, and understood from the lack of note that whoever had sent it wanted him to have it but not to know the source. He thought about what Dumbledore knew about him, what Dumbledore might want him to find. He thought about the 3rd floor. He folded the cloak and put it in his trunk and went down to Christmas breakfast and said nothing about it to anyone yet. He went to the 3rd floor on the 2nd night of the new year. He had told Ron and Hermione what he knew, not everything, but enough. The Flamel research, the troll diversion, the pattern of Quirrell's behavior. He had laid it out the way Diana had taught him to lay things out. What I know, what I suspect, what I'm inferring, and why. Hermione had sat very still through it and then asked 3 questions that improved the picture significantly. Ron had listened and then said, "So there's something incredibly dangerous under the school and the defense professor is after it." "I think so," Harry said. "Right," Ron said. He picked up his wand and put it in his pocket. "What's the plan?" "I'm going to look at what's in the corridor," Harry said. "Not past it, just at it, to understand what we're dealing with." "We're going," Hermione said. Harry looked at her. "You don't." "We're going," she said again, and her voice had the quality it got when she had decided something, which was the quality of stone. "Don't argue with me about it." "He wasn't going to," Ron said. "He knows better." "I know better," Harry agreed. They went on a Wednesday night, late, under the invisibility cloak, all 3 of them, which required proximity that Hermione bore with the expression of someone committed to an objective, down the 7th floor, the 6th, the 4th, and then right on the 3rd. And the corridor was there and the door at the end was there and locked, but not against Alohomora, which felt deliberate, which felt like an invitation. He pushed the door open. The dog was asleep. Enormous, 3 heads, each the size of a boulder, breathing in slow synchrony, a small harp playing beside it that was winding down, its enchantment fading. The dog lay across a trapdoor in the floor. The trapdoor had hinges and a ring handle, and between the dog's middle paw and the right front paw there was just enough space to see it clearly. Harry stood very still and looked at the dog and then at the harp and then at the dog again. Ron made a very controlled, very quiet sound of pure biological alarm. Hermione's hand found Harry's arm and gripped it. Harry studied the harp. Studied the way the dog's breathing was slow and heavy and synchronized with the harp's fading notes. He looked at the trapdoor. He looked at the hinges, good iron, recently oiled. He looked at the room itself, felt the enchantments layered on it, dense and varied, more than one caster's work. He took a mental photograph of all of it and backed up quietly and closed the door. In the corridor, he released a slow breath. "Okay," Ron whispered when they were far enough away. "What was that?" A Cerberus variant, Harry said still quietly. Or close to one. It responds to music. You saw the harp. Keep it playing, it sleeps. He kept walking. There's something under the trapdoor. More than one protection, I'd guess. That's what we came to see. We came to look, Hermione hissed. We are not going through the trapdoor. We don't have enough information. We don't have a reason. I know, Harry said. I'm not going through tonight. I needed to see the dog. She stopped walking. Why? Because everything else I've worked out has been inference and observation. The dog is real. The trapdoor is real. He looked at her. Now I know it's not a theory. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, tight and precise. She was afraid he could see it, not of the corridor but of where this was going, the direction it pointed. She was afraid because she was intelligent and she could see the end of the road from here. He respected the fear and didn't try to argue her out of it. We'll be prepared when we go, he said, properly prepared, and we'll only go if there's no other choice. What constitutes no other choice, she asked. Quirrell going through the trapdoor himself. She looked at him for a long moment. Then we need to know what's down there first. Yes, I'll research it, she said, not offering deciding. Thank you, Harry said. They went back to bed, and Harry lay in the dark with the curtains around his four-poster and thought about the dog and the harp in the trapdoor, and thought about Quirrell watching him at the Quidditch match with those cataloging eyes, and thought about what Diana had written. Something attracting attention from a direction I haven't been able to fully identify. He reached up and touched the wooden disc at his throat, thought about his mother. Thought about choices and inheritance and the specific weight of things that were destined versus things that were decided. He wasn't afraid. He was thinking. There was a difference. January brought the return of students and the return of structure and the return of Snape's potions class with the particular inevitability of winter weather. Snape had been doing something all term that Harry had been watching with growing interest. The man's behavior toward him had been shifting, almost imperceptibly, in a way that seemed involuntary. It wasn't becoming friendlier. Snape was constitutionally incapable of friendly, Harry suspected, or at least had been for long enough that friendly was no longer part of his available range. But the hostility had a different quality than it had at the start of term. It had become less active. He still called on Harry expecting failure. Harry consistently didn't fail, producing competent potions with the focused methodology of someone who had learned early that precision mattered, who had learned it from Amazons applying it to swords and healing and everything else worth doing correctly. He was never the best in the class, that was Hermione, whose theoretical knowledge and meticulous attention to measurement produced perfect results with the consistency of someone who treated potions like advanced chemistry, which they were. But he was consistently good, and Snape's expected failure kept not materializing. It seemed to be creating something in Snape that looked like confusion, except that confusion seemed too simple a word for what Harry observed in those black eyes. After a particularly good sleeping draft, Hermione's was better but Harry's was second, and Snape had examined it without comment, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Harry stayed after to clean his station, not because he had to but because he preferred to, and found himself alone in the classroom as the other students filtered out. Snape was at his desk writing something. Harry finished cleaning, packed his bag, and was heading for the door when Snape said, without looking up, "Your knowledge of theory is inconsistent, Mr. Potter." Harry stopped, turned. "Yes, sir, my practical training is more developed than my theoretical background." Snape looked up. "Who trained you practically?" "An Amazon warrior and Diana herself for some things." The silence was specific, not empty, populated by things Snape wasn't saying. He looked at Harry for a long moment with the complicated expression that Harry had been observing all term, and Harry waited for it to resolve into something. "Your mother," Snape said, "was the finest potions student I ever taught." He said it quietly, not softly. There was a difference, not generous, just accurate. Her instincts were extraordinary, her control was exact. He paused. "You have some of her instincts, you have none of her control yet." "I'm working on it," Harry said. Snape looked back at his desk. "See that you do, a beat." "Go," Harry went. In the corridor outside, he stood for a moment. Snape had known his mother, had admired her, genuinely, specifically, in the precise vocabulary of someone who was saying what they believed rather than what was comfortable. That was real. And underneath the whole complicated architecture of his hostility and grief and guilt, Harry could see the shape of it from the outside. Even if the details were missing, there was this. A man who had loved Lily Potter in some form and had been carrying it for a decade, and who was now confronted daily with her eyes in someone else's face. Harry thought about what to do with that information for approximately 10 seconds and decided nothing for now. But he filed it differently than before, not as a threat. As a fact about a person, he went to Charms. Hermione's research, conducted with the focused, systematic intensity of someone treating a library like a crime scene, produced the following over the course of January. A heavily annotated list of 7 possible magical protections that could be applied in sequence to guard a single object of extreme value, cross-referenced with the magical signatures she had detected in the third-floor room, of which she could identify 2 with confidence. The first is the harp enchantment, which is obviously external, she said. One evening in the library, the table between them covered in books and notes and the occasional piece of chalk from Neville, who had taken to studying with them. The second is a fire protection. I'm fairly confident it's Devil's Snare, which is a magical plant extremely dangerous in darkness and confined spaces and manageable with light or heat. The others I haven't identified yet. 7 protections, Ron said. Probably. It's a common magical number and there were at least 5 distinct enchantment signatures I could feel in that room. She looked at Harry. You could feel them too. Yes, Harry said. He had felt them the way he felt all magic. Not precisely, not the way a trained wizard would, but as textures, as weights. The island's magic had sensitized him to it over years of proximity, growing up in a place that was itself saturated with ancient power. What are we doing exactly? Neville asked. He had been told the full situation the week before in a conversation that Harry had opened with. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to be honest about whether you want to know it, because once you know it, there's no unknowing it. Neville had thought about it for exactly 3 seconds and said, tell me. And had listened to the whole account without interrupting, and then asked 2 good questions and then said, I'm in, just like that, quietly and completely. We're preparing, Harry said, for the possibility that Quirrell makes a move before we can get someone in authority to act. Why not go to Dumbledore now? Neville asked. Because Dumbledore set this up, Harry said. He made the protections or had them made. He knows the stone is at risk and he's chosen not to move it. Which means either he doesn't believe the threat is as serious as it is, or he believes the current arrangement is adequate, or he paused, and this was the part he'd been turning over, or he wants someone to come after it. The library was quiet around them. The fire in the corner reading alcove crackled. A trap, Hermione said slowly. Possibly, Harry tapped his quill on the table, a habit he'd picked up from watching Antiope think. He sent me the cloak. He has to know what I've been doing. This is his school. If he wanted me to stop looking, he would have stopped me. He looked around the table. He's letting me look. Maybe he wants to see what I find or what I do with it. So he's watching you, Ron said. He's been watching me since the feast, Harry said. That's fine, he can watch. As long as we're prepared for what actually matters. Which is Quirrell, Hermione said. Which is Quirrell? She looked at her notes, looked at Harry. Something resolved in her expression, the last hesitation going, replaced by the same quality of decision that had said we're going in the corridor. All right, she said. What do we need to know? They worked for 2 more hours. Neville knew more about Devil's Snare than any of them. Herbology was where he came alive, where his uncertainty dropped away and was replaced by something steady and capable, and he talked them through it with a competence that made Hermione look at him with genuine surprise and Ron grin with genuine pride. The key's protection Harry suspected would be broom-based, which was useful. The rest remained to be identified. They left the library at 9, just before Madame Pince's closing sweep, and walked back through the castle with the comfortable ease of people who had been moving through it for months now and knew its moods. At the portrait hole, Neville said goodnight and went up to bed. Ron followed, mentioning Quidditch practice and the early alarm he'd set, and Harry went more slowly, stopping by the window at the end of the landing to look out at the grounds. Hermione stopped beside him. You're not frightened, she said. Not accusatory, observational. No, Harry said. I am, she said. A little. I think it's appropriate to be a little frightened. It probably is, he agreed. She looked at the grounds, the snow-covered lawns pale in the moonlight. Do you think Quirrell knows we've been looking? I think Quirrell knows most things that happen in this castle, Harry said, and I think he's decided we're not a threat worth worrying about. He paused. That's a mistake. Yes, Hermione said quietly. I think it is. She said goodnight and went up. Harry stood at the window a moment longer. Below, the grounds were white and still. The forest edge was dark. The lake was a pale disk of ice. The castle was warm at his back. He thought about the mirror, his parents, Diana, Hippolyta, all in the same place, and understood it differently now than he had on the first night. The mirror showed desire, and his desire was complete and specific and grounded. It wasn't fantasy, it was direction. It was the direction he was already moving. He put his hand on the window glass, feeling the cold through it. I'm working on it, he thought again. I haven't stopped. February brought a Quidditch match and a confrontation, and a piece of information that rearranged several things Harry thought he understood. The match was Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff, and it was unremarkable except for the moment in the third period when Harry's broom began to act as if it had strong opinions about direction that were different from his. Not a malfunction, he had been on enough brooms to know the difference between a mechanical problem and an enchantment, but a targeted interference, subtle and deliberate. something that would look, to most observers, like an inexperienced rider struggling with a gusty day. Harry tightened his grip and flew through it. Not easily, the interference was skilled, whoever was doing it, but he had spent 5 years flying in Aegean crosswinds and had better core stability than most adult riders, and he used both of those things and kept himself in the air and found the snitch in 4 minutes largely through the strategy of not giving his broom time to settle into the interference pattern. He landed and stood for a moment after. His arms were shaking slightly from the sustained effort of overriding the enchantment. He let them shake and kept his face still. Ron was already there. "Your broom was being jinxed," he said quietly, very close. "Yes," Harry said. Hermione saw it too. She went up into the stands to break the eye contact. She thought it needed sustained concentration like most jinxes, and if she could find the caster and cut their line of sight, did she? "She set someone's robes on fire," Ron said. "By accident or possibly deliberately. The fire went out immediately, but yes, the broom settled. She said she had to move fast and didn't have time to be subtle." He paused. "She set Snape's robes on fire." Harry turned to look at the stands, where Snape was patting out the last of what appeared to have been a small but genuine fire on his left sleeve, with an expression of controlled outrage. He looked across the pitch, and for a moment his eyes met Harry's, and something moved in Snape's expression that Harry couldn't read. "She thought it was Snape doing the jinx," Ron said. "She saw him muttering and his eyes on your broom." "She was wrong," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "What?" Harry watched Quirrell across the pitch, talking to another teacher, his expression mild and friendly and perfectly performed. "Snape was counter-jinxing," Harry said. "He was trying to break it, not cast it." He watched Quirrell laugh at something the other teacher said. "Snape was protecting me." Ron was quiet for a long moment. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes exactly as much sense as everything else about him," Harry said. "He hated my father, he loved my mother, I have her eyes and his face, and he doesn't know what to do with either of those facts." He picked up his broom. "But he wasn't trying to kill me, he was trying to stop it." "Then who?" "Quirrell," Harry said quietly. "It was Quirrell the whole time." He said this not with satisfaction, not the satisfaction of having been right, which was a small feeling that Diana had taught him to be suspicious of, but with the particular weight of a piece falling into place that confirmed something you didn't want confirmed. Because if Quirrell was bold enough to jinx Harry's broom in front of the entire school, he was running out of patience, which meant the timeline had just shortened. Harry went to find Hermione. She was in the stands looking slightly stunned, her wand still in her hand and Snape's words from 30 seconds ago apparently still ringing in her ears. Something about students who cast fire spells in crowded spectator areas and the consequences thereof. "You were wrong about Snape," Harry said, sitting beside her. "I know," she said, in a voice of someone absorbing something difficult. "I should have observed more carefully before acting. I saw the muttering, the eye contact, and I made an assumption." She looked at her wand. "That was sloppy." "You saved my life," Harry said. "I was sloppy about it," she repeated, but some of the tension went out of her shoulders. "It was Quirrell." "Yes, then he knows we know." "He knew before the match," Harry said. "That's why he tried to take me out of it." He looked at the pitch, now emptying of students, the February wind cutting across the grass. "He's not being subtle anymore." "Which means he's ready to move," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry stood. "We need to be readier." She stood too, tucking her wand away. She looked out over the pitch. "I owe Snape an apology," she said. "You owe him robes," Harry said. She almost laughed, not quite, but almost. "Those two." He wrote to Diana that Sunday, longer than usual, 6 pages, everything he knew and suspected laid out clearly. He did not speculate beyond the evidence, but he gave her the shape of it, the direction it was pointing. Her reply came on Tuesday. 1 page, brief. "Harry, what you've described is consistent with something I've been watching from this end. The presence you're sensing in Quirrell is not only Quirrell. I need you to understand that clearly. There is something in that man that is older and more dangerous than the man himself. It is the reason for everything, the stammer, the behavior, the obsession with the stone. He is a vessel, not an agent. Whatever is in him will not be stopped by anything that stops a man. I am coming to England next month, not to interfere, but to be closer. This is non-negotiable. Write to me if anything accelerates. Immediately, Harry, promise me." Harry read the letter twice, then sealed his reply. "I promise. I love you. Don't come too early. It's not ready yet. When it is, you'll know." He put the letter in Athena's grip and watched her go from the tower window, dark wings cutting south across the gray February sky, and turned back to his desk and his books and the careful, methodical work of being prepared. Because whatever was in Quirrell, whatever was older and more dangerous than the man himself, it had tried to kill him when he was 15 months old and had failed, and the failure had not been his doing. But the next one would be. Chapter 5, Gods and Monsters. The end came on a Thursday in June, which was almost insultingly ordinary. No dramatic weather, no omen-laden sky. The grounds were green and warm, the lake reflecting late afternoon light in easy gold plates, sixth years revising under trees, a group of third-year Hufflepuffs playing some sort of card game on the lawn. The castle smelled of warm stone and the last of the year's fires burning down to comfort rather than necessity. It was exactly the kind of day that made you forget danger was a real thing. Harry was in the library when Hermione found him. She came fast, barely controlled, which for Hermione was the equivalent of anyone else arriving at a dead sprint. She sat down across from him and put both hands flat on the table and looked at him with the expression of someone who has run a calculation and doesn't like the answer. "Dumbledore's gone," she said quietly. "I heard McGonagall telling Sprout. He received an urgent owl this morning and left immediately. Ministry business, apparently." Harry was very still. "That's not a coincidence," she said. "No," he said. "The timing is too precise. Either someone sent him a false message to draw him away, or," she paused, "he left because he knew what was coming and decided to let it come." Harry looked at his book without seeing it. He had been thinking about this possibility for weeks, the trap idea, the notion that Dumbledore had architected the whole situation with a particular end in mind, including Harry's involvement. He still didn't know if that was true, but either way the result was the same. The stone was now accessible to Quirrell or whatever was riding Quirrell, and the window between now and whatever happened next was very short. He closed his book. "Get Ron and Neville," he said. "Library steps, 10 minutes." She was already standing. They met on the steps with the specific energy of people who have been preparing for something and have just been told it is now. Ron had his wand and an expression that was frightened and steady in equal measure. Neville had his herbology book under one arm out of pure reflex, realized it, and put it down. Hermione had her bag with everything she'd been quietly assembling for 2 weeks, specific plants from Sprout's greenhouse that Neville had helped her identify, a prepared light charm, notes on every protection she'd identified. Harry looked at the three of them. "This is the real thing," he said. "Not a drill, not preparation. Quirrell is going for the stone tonight, maybe already. If he gets it," he let them fill in the end of that sentence themselves because they knew what the stone did and they knew what was in Quirrell and they didn't need it explained. "We go through the trapdoor and we stop him." "Why not get a teacher?" Neville said, not pushing back, genuinely asking the question of someone who trusted Harry's answer. "Dumbledore's gone, McGonagall," Harry paused. "She'd stop us and go herself, and she doesn't know what's in Quirrell. I don't think she'd survive it." "You think you will?" Ron asked. Direct question, no challenge in it. Harry considered it honestly. "I think I'm the only one here who might," he said, "not because I'm special. Because of how I was trained." He looked at them. "You three don't have to come, this is mine, I won't think less of any of you." "Stop," Hermione said. "Absolutely stop," Ron said. Neville picked his herbology book back up, tucked it firmly under his arm and said, "We know about Devil's Snare, I'm coming." Harry looked at all three of them. Something moved in his chest, warm and specific and the same quality as what he'd felt in the Christmas common room, that thing that had been building all year out of mornings and arguments and shared tables and one bathroom with a troll in it. "Thank you," he said. He meant all of it. "Can we have a moment?" Ron said. "To, I don't know, maybe be briefly terrified and then move on." "You've got 30 seconds, Harry said. "That's not enough." 25. Ron made a sound of protest. Hermione pulled her bag onto her shoulder. Neville gripped his book. Harry waited. "Right," Ron said at 22 seconds. "Let's go then." The third-floor corridor had a different quality at dusk. Not frightening exactly. Harry had been frightened by exactly nothing in this castle and saw no reason to start but waited. The kind of heavy that real things had, as opposed to the lightness of ordinary days. The torches threw longer shadows. The door at the end stood slightly open. Slightly open was not how they had left it. Harry went through first, the others followed. The Cerberus fluffy Ron had learned the name from Hagrid, which Harry found both humanizing and slightly alarming, was asleep. The harp in the corner was playing on its own, enchanted, and the three massive heads were down and breathing slow. The trapdoor was already open, the ring handle folded flat, the darkness below absolute. Someone had gone through already. Harry looked at the harp. Someone had started it, which meant someone knew about the music. He felt a cold, precise focus settle over him, the same feeling as the moment before a sparring bout with Antiope when she was not going easy. Everything unnecessary falling away, everything necessary becoming very clear. He went through the trapdoor first, dropping into darkness. He fell about 10 feet and landed in something that grabbed him immediately, not with hands, with tendrils, fibrous and strong, wrapping his ankles and wrists with the purposeful tightening of something that responded to resistance by increasing it. He went completely still. The plant, Devil's Snare, dark and breathing in the absence of light, continued its slow exploration but stopped constricting. Above him, the others dropped through. He heard Hermione land and immediately go still, Ron land and not go still for 3 seconds before Hermione's urgent hiss brought him to stillness. "Light," Harry said. "Hermione." Her wand was already up. Lumos Solemn, a beam of brilliant white light that was not the ordinary illumination charm but the sunlight variant, and the plant recoiled from it with the speed of something that had been very comfortable and was suddenly extremely unhappy. The tendrils released, curling back into darkness, and they dropped the last few inches to stone floor. Neville was grinning. He couldn't help it, this was his subject, his knowledge, and it had worked exactly as he'd said it would. Devil's Snare, he said, loves the dark and the damp, simple once you know it. Well done, Harry said and meant it. They moved forward. The next chamber was full of keys, hundreds of them winged, filling the space with a sound like a mechanical aviary, silver and bronze and gold, circling the vaulted ceiling in slow orbits. 4 broomsticks stood against the wall. A heavy oak door at the far end had a keyhole and a very visible lock, and beside it nothing, just the faint imprint in the dust where someone had recently been standing with a broom. Someone already caught the key, Ron said, looking at the disturbed dust. Someone who can fly, Harry said. He was looking at the keys, thousands of them, patterns and movement, a problem of observation rather than speed. He reached for a broom without looking away from the canopy of wings. The doors locked again, which means the key returned to the swarm. How do you find the right one? Neville asked. Bent feathers, Hermione said, 2 seconds ahead of Harry's own analysis. The right key will have damaged wings, it's been used, the door's lock is heavy, it would have bent on the first pass. Look for one that isn't flying cleanly. Harry was already on the broom and in the air. He didn't fly fast. He flew the way he'd flown in his first snitch catch, reading first, moving second. He quartered the swarm systematically, eyes working the irregular movement, finding the patterns and then finding what didn't fit the patterns. The keys moved in loose families of similar sizes, and he narrowed the field by door size first, then by the ones with the slightly dragging right wings and found it at 40 seconds, hovering near the far arch as if it was trying to hide. He dove and caught it and was back on the ground in under a minute. Hermione looked at the key in his hand, the bent feathers, then at him. 40 seconds, she said. Longer than it should have been, Harry said. I'll work on it. He handed her the key. She unlocked the door. The next chamber hit them immediately with the smell of cold stone and something else, something animal, chess pieces. White on one side, black on the other, a board that was the entire floor, carved stone, figures the size of adults standing in perfect stillness. A 4th broomstick was missing from the set beside the door. Wizard chess, Ron said, and his voice had a different quality. Not fear, focus. The same quality that Harry had seen in him over the chessboard in the common room, the good version, the version that knew it was in its element. Can you play this? Harry asked. I can beat this, Ron said. He took position. Harry and Hermione and Neville moved to take the pieces Ron directed them to, large, cold stone, the sensation of sitting in something that had its own weight and opinion about being moved. Ron played. Harry watched and let him play, which was the only right move. This was not Harry's thing. He knew his strengths and he knew Ron's, and the job right now was to trust the right person with the right problem. Ron played with the total concentration that chess produced in him, speaking in short sentences, moving pieces with the precise authority of someone who had been learning this game from the age he could reach the board. He sacrificed pieces without hesitation. Harry, watching, recognized the pattern, not winning by accumulation, winning by decision, by being willing to lose something that wasn't the most important thing. 3 moves, then 5, then Ron called, Harry, you're the king's knight, move to e4. Harry moved. Ron, Hermione said from her piece. What you're setting up, I know, Ron said. It has to be me. He looked at Harry. I need to let myself be taken. It's the only path to checkmate. I move to h3, their queen takes me, and you two have a clear line to their king. Harry looked at the board, ran the lines himself. There's no other, Ron said. I've looked. 6 times. He moved his own piece to h3 and set his jaw. It's fine, it's not, I'll be knocked out, not dead. When you come back, I'll be here. Ron, Neville said. I'm fine, Ron said, with the cheerful certainty of someone who has made a decision and is not interested in revisiting it. Go, both of you. He looked at Harry one more time and grinned, sudden and real and completely himself. When the queen moved, Ron hit the floor. Harry was moving before he fully landed, was at his side before the stone had stopped rocking, checked him with 2 quick practiced assessments, breathing, pulse, and looked up at Hermione. He's out, not hurt badly. He stood, stay with him. Harry. Hermione, he met her eyes, stay with him. When he comes round, he'll need someone here who knows what happened. He held her gaze for a moment. You know I have to go alone from here. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were very bright. She looked at Ron on the floor and back at Harry, and the war between her instinct to keep going and her recognition of what was right played itself out in approximately 2 seconds. Come back, she said. I intend to, Harry said. He went through the door. The troll chamber was already handled. The troll, unconscious, clearly dealt with before they arrived, which confirmed Quirrell had come this way. The potion chamber beyond it had a ring of flames and 7 bottles on a shelf with a riddle parchment on the stand. And Harry read it, worked it in 60 seconds. The riddle was elegant. Hermione would have loved it. 1 forward and 1 back and the rest nettle, wine and poison. Drank the right one, felt the cold spread through him like winter water and stepped through the black fire. The last chamber. The mirror of Eris stood in its center, repositioned from the 7th floor, its frame gleaming, its surface dark. And in front of it Quirrell. His back was to Harry. He was studying the mirror with the focused frustration of someone who has been looking at a thing for a long time and cannot make it give him what he wants. His traveling cloak was dusty from the chambers behind him. His hands were clasped behind his back. Harry walked into the room and stopped. The absence of the stammer was the first thing. When Quirrell turned, there was no flutter of nervous performance, no adjusted affect. Just the face without its mask, and the face without its mask was calm and direct and something else occupied, not completely present, shared. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, his own voice clean. "I wondered if you'd come." "I imagine you did," Harry said. "You've been watching me all year." Not accusing, acknowledging with something close to appreciation. "Most 11-year-olds see exactly what I want them to see. You were inconveniently observant." "Diana taught me to pay attention," Harry said. He was in the room, both feet on the floor, entirely present. He was taking in everything: Quirrell's position relative to the mirror, the room's dimensions, the doors, the quality of the light, the stone under his feet. The way Quirrell was standing, still, controlled, wrong. "She's good at it too. The Amazon." Quirrell's eyes moved over Harry with the specific assessment of something that was deciding what he was. An unusual guardian for the boy who lived. "I've always thought so," Harry said. "Where's the stone?" A smile, thin, real, utterly unlike the performance they'd been watching all year. "In the mirror," Quirrell said. "I've been trying to retrieve it for 20 minutes. Dumbledore's enchantment is clever. It only gives the stone to someone who wants to find it, not use it. My master's desire corrupts my approach, it seems." He tilted his head. "But you, I'm not getting the stone for you," Harry said. "No," Quirrell agreed. "I thought we'd move past polite requests." He raised one hand and made a small, precise gesture, and the room's door sealed behind Harry with a sound like stone on stone. "You are an interesting obstacle. My master wants to see you clearly. He has wanted to see you clearly for 10 years. "He can see me clearly from there," Harry said. Quirrell's expression changed. It was subtle, but it was real. A flicker of something behind the eyes that was not Quirrell. That looked at Harry with a quality of attention that was very old and very cold, and very familiar in the way that something you've heard about your whole life is familiar when you finally encounter it. "Remarkable," said a voice that was not Quirrell's voice. It came from somewhere behind the head, and it was thin and high and had the specific quality of something that had been surviving rather than living for a very long time. 10 years, and here you stand." "Here I stand," Harry said. "You are not afraid." Why not? Genuine curiosity in the question, not a performance, not a taunt. Harry thought about the honest answer. "Because you already failed," he said. "Whatever you are, whatever's left of you, you came at me when I was 15 months old and you couldn't finish it. Everything since then has been you trying to get back to a place you've already been. That's not power. That's repetition." The silence that followed was long enough to have weight. "Your mother's sacrifice," the voice said, and there was something in it, not grief, but the recognition of something that had been a wall for 10 years. "Love, the oldest magic. You think I don't understand it. I think you understood it once," Harry said, "and chose something else." Quirrell's hands rose. "Enough conversation," the voice said, and now it had an edge, something cold and sharp running under the thin sound of it. "I'll take him." Quirrell moved fast, faster than he had any right to, faster than his thin frame suggested, with the speed of something being driven harder than the machinery that was designed for. He went at Harry with his hands outstretched and his eyes fixed. Harry moved. He went sideways and down, the same instinct that had taken him inside the troll's swing radius. "Don't go back, go through," and Quirrell's reaching hands passed over him. He came up behind the man and drove his elbow into the back of Quirrell's knee exactly as he'd done with the troll, and Quirrell buckled but didn't fall, catching himself with something that was not entirely human reflex, and turned. There was a sound. Not a spell sound, a physical sound, the sound of contact, because Quirrell's hands had closed on Harry's wrist in the turn, and immediately Quirrell screamed. Not pain, the other kind. Worse. Harry looked at his wrist where Quirrell held it. The skin where they touched was blistering, not Harry's skin. Quirrell's, the contact was burning him. Harry understood it in the same instant, the way you understood things that were bigger than logic. His mother's sacrifice, the love magic, the protection she had woven into him with her death, it hadn't gone away. It had never gone away. It was in his skin and his blood and the simple fact of him, and whatever Quirrell carried, whatever dark and loveless thing had taken up residence in this man's body, it could not bear to touch it. He grabbed Quirrell's wrist in return. Quirrell screamed again, louder, twisting, trying to pull back, and Harry held on, not cruelly, not with satisfaction, with the focused clarity of someone doing what needed to be done with the full understanding that it needed to be done. Stop. The voice behind Quirrell's head screamed, and it wasn't cold anymore. It was raw, stripped of its composure, something that had been sealed off for 10 years suddenly cracked open. Stop, get away. No, Harry said. He was looking at Quirrell's face, the face that was cracking now, the performance and the occupation both coming apart together. The two things that had been sharing this body separating under the pressure of something they could not both survive. Quirrell was in there somewhere, the real man, the frightened man, the man who had been used and diminished and would not survive what was happening to him. And Harry looked at him with something that was not pity exactly but was adjacent to it. Let it go, Harry said, and he was not talking to Quirrell. You cannot, the voice began. Harry tightened his grip. Quirrell's skin was blistering badly now, going ashen, the dark thing's hold on the flesh weakening as the magic in Harry's blood seared through the contact point. The scream that came out of Quirrell was not a human sound. It was the sound of something that had been trying to stay alive for 10 years finally meeting something it couldn't outlast. The mirror flashed. Not dramatically, not with fire and thunder, not the way stories described these moments. A single clean pulse of light, gold and sharp like a match struck in a dark room, and then it was done. Something went out of the room. Not literally, not with a physical exit, it simply ceased to be present. The quality of the air changed. The cold thing, the old thing, the thing that had been Voldemort and was now less than a ghost, retreated back into whatever formless nowhere it had been occupying for a decade. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him before he hit the floor, purely reflex, Antiope's training, you didn't let things fall if catching them was possible, and lowered him to the stone. The man's face without any occupation in it was very still. He was breathing barely, the sound of it wrong and shallow. Harry straightened and looked at the mirror. In it, he saw his own reflection, and his reflection's hand was holding something. A small red stone, warm-colored, the size of a large marble. He felt it in his actual pocket a moment later there, real, the enchantment having worked exactly as Dumbledore had designed, transferring to someone who wanted to find it and not use it. He held it up and looked at it. The Philosopher's Stone, the source of the elixir of life. The thing that had drawn Voldemort across a continent and through a willing host and through 6 magical obstacles. It was quite small for what it was. He put it carefully in his breast pocket and checked on Quirrell again, still breathing, pulse weak but present, and then sat down on the floor beside him and waited. He did not have to wait long. The door unsealed not from Quirrell's death but from the outside, the sound of multiple people on the stairs. McGonagall arrived first, wand drawn, and stopped short when she saw the room. Dumbledore was a step behind her. Dumbledore took in the scene with the particular quality of a man who has anticipated an arrival but is still affected by what he finds. His eyes went to Quirrell unconscious on the floor, to the mirror, to Harry sitting beside the fallen man with his hands on his knees. McGonagall made a sound. Harry. She crossed to him immediately, kneeling, running a diagnostic charm with the speed of someone well-practiced. Are you hurt? Your wrist? It's fine, Harry said. His wrist had some bruising where Quirrell had gripped it, nothing else. It is not fine, she said, with the specific tone of a woman who was going to be very controlled about the fact that a first-year student had apparently done something extraordinary and terrifying in her school tonight, and that being very controlled about it was the only available option. Let me, Professor. Harry met her eyes. I'm genuinely fine. Quirrell needs help more than I do. She looked at him for a moment. Then turned to Quirrell. Harry stood up. He and Dumbledore looked at each other across the length of the room. Dumbledore had never had quite this expression in Harry's experience, not the benign watchful assessment from the feast, not the deliberate oversight of a headmaster who was also running a strategy. Something had been adjusted in the old man's face, something recalibrated, and what was there now was more honest, more present. The stone, Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his breast pocket and held it out. Dumbledore looked at it, made no move to take it. You found it in the mirror. It found me, Harry said. That's how you designed it, someone who wanted to find it, not use it. He kept his hand extended. Take it. What would you have me do with it? Harry held his gaze. Destroy it, he said. It should have been destroyed before it was ever brought here. The risk it created, the amount of danger it put this school in, he paused. That was your choice. You made that choice and the people in the path of the consequences didn't get to make it with you. The silence in the room was specific. McGonagall had looked up from Quirrell. Dumbledore's expression moved through something Harry couldn't entirely read, not quite guilt, not quite defensiveness, something more complicated than both. He stepped forward and took the stone from Harry's hand. You are remarkably composed for someone who has just faced Voldemort, Dumbledore said. I've been composing myself since I was 7, Harry said. You don't get to call it remarkable and then use it as a reason not to answer for the choices that put me in the position to need it. A breath of silence. No, Dumbledore said after a moment. I don't. He looked at the stone in his hand. You're right that it should be destroyed. I will speak with Nicholas. This was a miscalculation on my part in several directions. Harry nodded. He believed this. The old man was telling the truth, or the version of the truth that was accessible to him, which was not the same as the whole truth but was more than Harry had expected to get tonight. Quirrell, Harry said. He was a vessel. Whatever Voldemort was doing with him, he's gone now. Both of them might be. Quirrell was already dying, Dumbledore said quietly. The possession had been destroying his body for months. He would not have survived the year regardless. He looked at the fallen man with an expression that was genuine regret. He was a good teacher before, curious and enthusiastic and kind to his students. Harry looked at Quirrell too, at the still face, the slack hands. People who are frightened and desperate make choices that destroy them, he said. That's not absolution, but it's not nothing either. McGonagall stood, her diagnostic complete. He needs the hospital wing, she said. Now. And so do you, she added to Harry in the tone of someone who would not be argued with. Yes, ma'am, Harry said. She actually stopped moving for a moment, arrested by the compliance. Then her mouth did something that was almost a smile. Professor Dumbledore will carry Professor Quirrell. You will walk with me and you will tell me precisely nothing until we are away from this room. Yes, ma'am, Harry said again. They left the room. Harry took one last look at the mirror of Arist as he passed it. His reflection looked back at him, hands empty now, and smiled. The hospital wing had the specific smell of all hospitals, which was competence and lavender and the particular anxiety of people who were fine and knew they were fine, but were being made to stay in bed anyway. Harry lay in the bed Madame Pomfrey had assigned him with the sheet pulled to his waist and looked at the ceiling and let the evening wind down. She had checked him 3 times, each time announcing with increasing irritation that he was fine, as if fine was a diagnosis she was personally affronted by. Ron arrived at 9 the next morning, with a bandage around his head that he wore with the air of someone who had earned a decoration. Hermione came 2 steps behind him with her bag over one shoulder and the expression of someone who had been awake most of the night, running everything through her head. Neville came behind both of them holding 3 pieces of cake from the Great Hall wrapped in a napkin, which was the most Neville thing that had ever happened. Ron sat on the end of Harry's bed. Tell us, he said. Harry told them. Everything in order, with the same economy and directness he'd used with Diana's letters. What happened, what he'd done, what he'd understood, what was still unclear. Ron listened with focused intensity. Hermione sat in the chair beside the bed and took 2 pages of notes that she then looked at and tucked away. Neville ate one of the cake pieces and held the others out to Harry. The mirror, Hermione said when Harry finished. You took the stone from the mirror by wanting to find it and not use it. Yes. Did it feel different from ordinary magic? Everything in that room felt different, Harry said, but the mirror, he thought about how to describe it. It felt like recognition. Like the magic in the mirror and whatever my mother left in me were the same language. Hermione was quiet for a moment. That's not in any book I've read, she said, which means it's either too ancient to have been written down or too personal to have been recorded, or both. Both probably, Harry said. Is he dead? Ron asked. Voldemort. No, Harry said. He was certain of this the way you were certain of things you'd felt rather than deduced. He's gone again, back to whatever he was between then and now, but he's not dead. He looked at the ceiling. He's patient. He'll find another way. The room was quiet. We'll deal with that when it comes, Ron said, with the tone of someone not willing to let future problems colonize the present. Right now you're in hospital and Neville has cake. I do have cake, Neville confirmed and held the napkin out again. Harry took a piece. It was good cake, lemon, with something that tasted of real vanilla. He ate it in the morning light of the hospital wing with his 3 friends around him and let it be what it was. Good, uncomplicated, real. Chapter 6, Prince of Two Worlds. The end-of-year feast happened on a Wednesday evening with the castle wearing its best light. Torches doubled, and the enchanted ceiling showing a clear June sky going amber at the edges. Summer arriving with the particular inevitability of something that had been promised all along. The 4 house tables were loud and warm, and the smell of the feast was extraordinary: roasted things and fresh bread, and something that might have been treacle tart, and something that was definitely Neville's 3rd helping of shepherd's pie. Harry sat at Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione and watched the hall with the kind of attention that had become second nature over the year. Not surveillance, just presence, the habit of actually being somewhere rather than just occupying it. He felt good. Not triumphant, not vindicated. Not the way he'd expected to feel at the end of something, just good, in the clean, simple way of a thing being complete. He had been in the hospital wing for 2 days. Madame Pomfrey had discharged him on Monday morning with the air of someone performing a professional duty she found personally objectionable, having apparently decided that Harry's refusal to be injured more seriously was a form of insubordinance. He had thanked her genuinely, and she had told him she expected not to see him back before September, and he had said nothing to that, which she had interpreted correctly. The week between the hospital wing and the feast had been its own kind of strange, the castle knowing something had happened, the news moving through it in the particular way that news moved through schools, which was fast and distorted and mostly true in the broad strokes and wrong in the details. The official story, as filtered through McGonagall and Dumbledore's careful communications, was that there had been an incident involving Professor Quirrell and a contained magical artifact, that Quirrell had suffered a serious magical accident and been taken to St. Mungo's, and that the matter was resolved. The student version was considerably more dramatic and considerably less accurate. Harry had heard at least 4 different accounts of what had happened, each one featuring himself doing something different and increasingly improbable, and had responded to every inquiry with "I can't really talk about it," which had done nothing to reduce the speculation and everything to confirm it. Draco Malfoy had watched him across the hall for 3 days with an expression that was working through something large. He hadn't approached. He hadn't said anything. He had simply watched, and Harry had let himself be watched, and whatever Draco was working through, he was doing it in private. Dumbledore stood now at the head of the hall and waited for quiet. It came the way it always came when Dumbledore stood up, not instantly but with a kind of inevitability, the noise folding down like something being put away. "Another year end," Dumbledore said. "And what years do? The castle looks different when you've lived in it. The staircases you didn't trust become the ones you used to think. The rooms that confused you become the rooms you understand. This is, I believe, what education actually is, not the accumulation of information, though information matters, but the slow revision of what seems like the world into what the world actually is." He paused. "In that spirit, I have several last-minute additions to the house point totals." He looked around the hall over his half-moon spectacles. "For outstanding nerve and presence of mind, I award 50 points to Neville Longbottom." The hall went briefly silent in surprise, and then the Gryffindor table erupted. Neville, who had apparently not been expecting this, went so red so fast that Ron leaned sideways to look at him with concern. 50 points to Hermione Granger for exceptional research and practical magical skill. Hermione's composure held for approximately 2 seconds. Then she pressed her lips together very hard and looked at the table, and Ron, who had been watching her with the specific attention of someone prepared for this, handed her his napkin under the table without a word. 50 points to Ronald Weasley for the best played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in a century. Ron's ears went red from both sides simultaneously. Fred and George, 5 seats down, made a noise like something being released. Dumbledore's gaze moved to Harry. Harry met it. "And to Harry Potter," Dumbledore said, and the hall was completely silent now, the specific silence of 600 people not breathing at the same time, "for a quality that this school tries to teach and rarely sees demonstrated so clearly at the age of 11, the wisdom to know what power is for." He paused. 60 points. The Gryffindor table stood up. Not all of it immediately. It was a wave, starting near Harry and Ron and moving outward. People who knew standing first and people who were following the room's energy standing after, and then it wasn't just Gryffindor. It was Hufflepuff standing too, and half of Ravenclaw. And at the Slytherin table, a long, complex stillness before 2 students near the end stood up, and the rest sat in studied stillness, and Draco Malfoy sat in the middle of it looking at Harry with an expression that was finally, after a year of management and performance, nothing but honest. Harry looked back. He didn't gloat. He didn't perform humility either. He just looked, and whatever Draco saw in that look, it seemed to settle something. Gryffindor won the House Cup by a considerable margin. The feast was extraordinary. Dumbledore found him after. Harry had been expecting this, had been expecting it all week. And when the headmaster appeared at the doorway of the corridor where Harry had stepped out for air, the feast still going strong behind him, Ron in the middle of describing the chess game to an audience that included most of Gryffindor's 3rd year, it felt less like an ambush and more like the conclusion of a very long conversation that had been happening in pieces all year. "A moment, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Of course," Harry said. They walked together toward the window at the corridor's end, the old man's robe sweeping softly on the stone, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the grounds were still and warm in the summer evening light. The lake was dark gold at the edges where the sun still reached it. Dumbledore looked at the grounds for a moment, and then turned to face Harry with the expression of a man who has decided to have a particular conversation, and is honoring that decision even though part of him would prefer not to. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me several," Harry said pleasantly, a small smile. "Yes." He clasped his hands in front of him. "The stone. I was not as careful as I should have been. I saw the threat and I calculated, as I have a tendency to do, and the calculation prioritized the outcome over the people in the path of it." He paused. "That was wrong." Harry waited. I also, Dumbledore continued, sent you an invisibility cloak without identifying myself as the sender, and I believe you have worked out why. You wanted me to find the stone, Harry said, not to retrieve it. To be in a position to protect it if everything else failed, because I was the one person Voldemort couldn't touch. He looked at the old man. You designed me into the protection. I believed, Dumbledore said carefully, that if the worst came to pass, your particular protections would be relevant. Without asking me. You were 11. I was 11 when you made the decision, Harry said. I'm still 11 now, and I'm telling you that going forward, decisions that put me in the path of Voldemort need to involve me, not as a child being managed, as someone with a stake in the outcome. He held the old man's gaze with the particular quality of steadiness that 3,000 years of Amazonian wisdom, filtered through Diana, had been building in him since before he could read. Is that clear? The silence stretched for a long moment. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that went through several things before settling on something that was, Harry thought, genuine, not performance, not calculation, genuine. The expression of a man who had expected a particular kind of conversation and found himself in a different one and was, with considerable grace, revising in real time. That is clear, Dumbledore said, and accepted. Thank you, Harry said. May I ask, Dumbledore paused, in the room with Quirrell. You said he was a vessel, that you knew what was in him was not only him. How did you know that? Diana told me, Harry said, in a letter. He paused. She also told me she was coming to England. She may still be nearby. Dumbledore's expression moved, something between surprise and the recalibration of a man who has been thinking about a chessboard and just been told there are pieces on it he hadn't accounted for. Diana of Themyscira, he said. I wondered when she would become directly involved. She's been directly involved since October 31st, 1981, Harry said. She was just doing it from a distance. Yes. Dumbledore looked at the grounds again. She is extraordinary by any account. She is, Harry said, simply without qualification. She's my mother. The word landed the way it always did when Harry said it, with the specific weight of a word that was chosen rather than assigned. Not biological fact, but declared truth. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then you are very fortunate, Harry, to have been loved so well. I know, Harry said. Another pause. Comfortable this one, the specific comfort of a difficult conversation that has found its real floor and is sitting on solid ground. I expect, Dumbledore said, that the years ahead will be complicated. Probably, Harry agreed. Voldemort will return, not this year, not perhaps the next, but he is patient and he is not destroyed. I know, Harry said again. And when he does, Harry said, I'll be ready, and I'll be ready on my terms with the people I choose, with information shared rather than managed. He looked at Dumbledore. That's the deal, that's the only deal I'm interested in. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. The grounds were going dark outside, the last of the sun pulling back from the lake, the forest settling into its nighttime self. The castle at their backs was warm with the sounds of the feast, 600 children eating and laughing and being exactly what they were. Deal, said Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, and he put out his hand. Harry shook it. He found Draco in the library the next morning. Not sought him out, found him in the sense that he came to return a book, and Draco was there, alone, which was unusual, sitting at a table with a book open in front of him that he was clearly not reading. He looked up when Harry came in, and his expression did that thing it had been doing all week, settling into honesty without having decided to. Harry sat down across from him. Draco looked at him. You could have made me look like a fool in front of the whole school, he said. You had plenty of opportunity. I could have, Harry agreed. You didn't. Number Draco was quiet for a moment. Looked like he was working out how to say something he didn't have the right words for yet. What you said in November about my father being afraid. He pressed his mouth together. I've been thinking about it. Harry waited. He wrote to me after the feast, after what happened. He said you were dangerous, that the Dark Lord's return would clarify things. Draco's voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him something. He said people who had stayed loyal would be on the right side of it. And what do you think? Harry asked. Draco looked at the table, at his hands which were clasped on top of the book he wasn't reading. I think, he said slowly, like a person extracting something carefully from a difficult place, that my father's world is very small and that he thinks the smallness is the point. He looked up, and I think I don't want a small world. Harry said nothing. I'm not saying I've had some revelation, Draco said with a flash of his usual sharpness. I'm not joining your side or whatever, I'm just saying I heard what you said and I've been thinking about it. A pause. I'm still going to be difficult. I know, Harry said. I'll probably say things I shouldn't. Probably, Harry agreed, and I don't trust easily. The honesty cost him visibly. I don't know how. That's okay, Harry said. It's a learnable skill. Draco looked at him with the expression of someone who finds it extremely irritating to find someone else's optimism genuine rather than naive. You are the strangest person I've ever met, he said. Ron said that too, Harry said. You're in good company. Draco looked affronted at the Ron comparison. Then reluctantly the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the shape of one briefly. Go away, Potter, he said, but he said it with a different quality than it had carried all year. Harry went away, he was smiling. The train home left on a Friday morning, in the kind of weather that June saved for its best days, warm and clear. The sky a specific shade of blue that had no clouds in it and no intention of acquiring any. The Hogwarts Express stood at the platform in its great red magnificence, and the platform was chaos in the good way. Trunks and families, the twins launching something from a window that produced gold sparks, Neville's grandmother waiting at the far end with the bearing of a woman who had expected her grandson to survive and is pleased to be confirmed correct. Harry stood on the platform with his trunk and Athena in her cage and let the noise wash over him. Ron was 10 feet away being consumed by his mother in a hug that looked structural, the kind that built rather than restrained. Hermione was with her parents, a neat, smiling couple who looked at their daughter with the specific pride of people encountering something they'd made that had exceeded all reasonable expectation. He had said goodbye to the castle this morning. Walked the corridors early before anyone was up the way he'd walked the lake shore in December, paying attention, memorizing, building the picture he'd carry until September. The moving staircases, the suits of armor, the fat lady's portrait who had called after him with cheerful formality. The lake mirror still in the early light, he would come back. He knew this with the certainty of someone who had found, in a place they hadn't been looking for it, something that belonged to them. He was loading Athena onto the train when he felt it, not a sound, not a signal, just a change in the quality of the air, the same prickle at the back of his neck that had been telling him true things all year. He turned. Diana was standing at the entrance to the platform. She was in her ordinary clothes, the long coat, dark trousers, her hair loose, and she looked exactly as she always looked, which was like someone the world had been designed around, which was exactly what she was. She was scanning the platform with the particular attention of someone looking for a specific person, and she found him immediately. They held each other's gaze across the length of the platform. Harry moved first. Not running, something more controlled than running, but not by much, closing the distance with the directness of someone who knows where they need to be. And she crossed toward him too, and they met in the middle of the platform, and she pulled him into the same hold she had on the dock of Themyscira 10 months ago, and he put his face against her shoulder and held on. She held him back completely. Around them, the platform continued its organized chaos, hundreds of people navigating their own returns and arrivals, and Harry and Diana stood in the middle of it for a moment that was just that, just the two of them, the specific warmth of a reunion between people who mean exactly as much to each other as they appear to. She pulled back and looked at him, her hands on his shoulders. Her eyes going over him with the focused assessment of someone who knows how to read a person, looking for damage, for change, for what had been cost and what had been kept. Your wrist, she said, touching the bruised skin lightly. It's fine, he said. Madame Pomfrey's report was more detailed than your letters, she said. You talked to Pomfrey. I am your guardian. She was legally required to respond to my inquiry. She looked at him. Tell me everything. On the train, he said, I want you to meet Ron and Hermione and Neville first. She looked at the platform, finding them without difficulty. Ron had extracted himself from his mother's orbit and was looking at Harry and Diana from a respectful distance with the expression of someone encountering something they've heard described and finding the description inadequate. Hermione had turned from her parents and was looking with the focused attention of someone collating information. Neville at the far end was craning to see. The boy with the red hair has your eyes, Diana said, the same thing in them. That's Ron, Harry said. He gave up his queen to let me through. He didn't hesitate. Diana looked at Ron Weasley for a moment with the expression she had for things that she was deciding were genuinely good. I'd like to meet him, she said. They crossed the platform. Ron watched them come with the expression of someone preparing to meet the mother of a friend, and being considerably more prepared than they wanted to be. He stood up straight without meaning to. Something about Diana's presence arranged people into better posture without any effort on her part, the same way Hippolyta did, the same quality of someone whose being upright is so natural it becomes instructive. Ron Weasley, Harry said, this is Diana. Hello, Ron said, and shook her hand with the combination of nerves and genuine friendliness that was his particular social signature. Diana shook his hand and looked at him with that direct attention. Harry tells me you played a chess game that ended the board, she said. Ron's ears went pink. It was the only. It was brave, Diana said, and said it simply, and Ron blinked twice and then nodded once and stood up a little straighter, which was saying something because he'd already straightened. Hermione was next. She shook Diana's hand with composure and said, "I've read everything available about Themyscira in magical archives. It isn't very much." "No," Diana agreed with a small smile. "It isn't. We like it that way." "I have approximately 40 questions," Hermione said. "I have a train journey to London," Diana said. "Ask." Hermione looked at Harry with the expression of someone recalibrating their estimation of a person upward, which was impressive given that it had already been high. Neville, when they reached him, was standing with his grandmother, who was a tall woman in a spectacular hat and an expression of comprehensive competence. She assessed Diana in about 2 seconds and apparently found the assessment satisfying because she extended her hand with the bearing of one force of nature greeting another. "Augusta Longbottom," she said. Diana said. They shook hands with the gravity of a formal treaty. "Your boy fought well," Diana said, and Augusta's face did something that was brief and fierce and genuine before the composure reasserted itself. "My grandson," Augusta said, with a precision that was its own declaration. "He always does, eventually." Neville beside her went pink and smiled and looked at the floor with the expression of someone encountering pride from a direction they weren't expecting. Harry watched this and felt something that had been present all year, diffuse and building, crystallize into something clear. This was what he had seen in the mirror. Not the literal image, Diana and his parents and Hippolyta together, but the thing the image meant. This collection of people. This particular family that was made rather than inherited. Both things at once, both worlds. They found a compartment near the front of the train, the 5 of them, Diana at the window, Harry beside her, Ron and Hermione across from them, Neville at the end. Athena settled on the overhead rack and regarded them all with the tolerant superiority of an owl who had decided to allow this. As the train pulled out of the station and King's Cross slid away behind the windows and England opened up outside in its green summer best, Diana turned to Harry. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning," he told her. He told it differently than he had for the hospital wing gathering, longer, more complete, with the 3 of them filling in sections he hadn't been present for. Diana listened with the complete attention she gave to things that mattered, which was most things. She asked questions that were precise and went to the center of things, about Quirrell's behavior, about the mirror, about the moment of contact, about what she called the nature of the expulsion and what Harry described as something going out of the room. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother's sacrifice," she said. "I always knew it was powerful. The shape of it, dying freely for love with a specific person in mind, it's an ancient form of magic that most of the modern wizarding world has forgotten to take seriously." She looked at her hands. She knew what she was doing. Lily understood what she was weaving. "She was buying time," Harry said, "not just for that night." "Yes," Diana said, "she was buying you all the time you needed to be ready." She looked at him. "And you were ready." "We were ready," Harry said, and the correction was deliberate. He looked at Ron, at Hermione, at Neville. "All of us." Diana followed his gaze. Considered the 3 people across from her with the measuring look of someone who had spent 3,000 years assessing worth, and was now updating her understanding of it to include the specific variety produced by 11-year-olds under pressure. Then she looked back at Harry with an expression that was warm and fierce and wholly unguarded. "Yes," she said, "all of you." Ron had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone trying not to look like they were touched by something and failing. He cleared his throat. "So," he said to Diana with the cheerful directness of someone moving through sentiment to more comfortable ground. "Harry says you once lifted a tank." Diana looked at Harry. "You told him about the tank." "He asked what you could do," Harry said. "I gave examples." "How many examples?" "Several." Hermione had produced a notebook, Harry noticed, which was either an invasion of privacy or the appropriate response to an unprecedented research opportunity, and was probably both simultaneously. "Would you say," she began. "Hermione," Harry said, "I'm asking politely. You're asking 40 questions with one breath." "That's not," she looked at Diana. "Is there a better time?" "I genuinely don't want to be rude, You are curious," Diana said with the warm practicality of someone for whom curiosity was a personal virtue. "That's not rude, ask," Hermione asked. For the next 40 minutes, she asked with focused intensity, and Diana answered with the directness of someone who had decided these children were worth being honest with. And the conversation ranged from the magical traditions of the ancient world to the relationship between Olympian magic and the British wizarding tradition, to the specific properties of the lasso of truth, to whether Diana had ever met Merlin. Which had apparently happened once and briefly, and Diana's account of it made Ron actually fall off his seat laughing. Neville asked, quietly, about Amazonian herbalism. Diana spent 20 minutes on it with the focused pleasure of someone talking to a person who genuinely cared about their answer. Harry sat beside her and listened and watched his two worlds occupying the same space without friction and felt the thing in the mirror becoming real, not as an image but as a fact. Outside, England went by in its summer self. Farms and hills and small towns and the slow deepening of afternoon light toward evening. The train moved north through it, making the same journey it had made in September in reverse, bringing things back instead of taking them forward, which was its own kind of gift. At some point in the afternoon, when the conversation had settled into companionable quiet and Ron had fallen asleep against the window and Neville was reading, and Hermione was writing with the focused speed of someone who has a great deal to get down before they forget it, Diana put her hand on Harry's arm. He looked at her. "How are you?" she asked. Not the general version, the real one, the question that meant not the surface version, the actual thing. Harry thought about it honestly. He had spent the year learning to think honestly and not quickly, to give the real answer rather than the available one. "Good," he said, "really good. Not because of the stone or Voldemort or not because of any of the big things. Because of," he looked at Ron asleep against the window, Hermione writing, Neville reading, the compartment warm in the afternoon light. "Because of this." Diana looked where he looked. "Yes," she said, "this. I found something here," he said. "Something I didn't know I was missing, not instead of the island, in addition to it." He paused. "Both worlds." "Both worlds," Diana agreed. "I'm coming back in September." "I know. And next summer I'm coming home." "I know that too," she said, and her voice had the quality it had on the dock of Themyscira, that quality of something enormous being held gently. "Antiope wants to start on the horseback forms. She says you've been putting them off long enough." Harry smiled. "Tell her I'll be there in June. She'll say July is more convenient for her schedule." "She has no schedule." "She has enormous dignity," Diana said. "It's not the same thing, but she treats it as if it is." Harry laughed, a real one, easy and free, and Diana laughed with him, and Ron stirred without waking and resettled. And the train moved through the summer evening carrying everything it was carrying, which was considerable. King's Cross arrived at 6 in the evening. The platform was the same chaos as the Hogwarts end had been. Families, noise, the particular relief of reunions happening in every direction. Harry stood on the platform with his trunk and Athena and Diana beside him and watched it. Ron was engulfed by Mrs. Weasley again, this time with more children than before, two more older ones, who turned out to be Bill and Charlie, and the two girls Harry hadn't met yet. The entire Weasley family in one place was an event, he observed, in the same way that weather was an event. His general sense that he was going to love all of them was strongly confirmed. Hermione's parents took her carefully, the way parents took children who had been somewhere significant and were checking the edges for damage. Her mother caught Harry's eye over Hermione's shoulder and mouthed something that might have been thank you or might have been something else, and Harry nodded, not sure exactly what he was nodding to but feeling it was right. Neville went with his grandmother, who shook Harry's hand again before they left and said, "My grandson speaks highly of you, Mr. Potter. That counts for a great deal," and walked away with the bearing of someone for whom bearing was the first and last line of defense. Harry watched them go and turned back to Diana, who was watching the platform with the particular expression of someone who has lived long enough to find ordinary human happiness one of the better things the world produces. "Ready?" she said. "Where are we going?" Harry asked. "I have a flat in London through the summer, closer than the island, easier for the league business I need to handle." She looked at him. "And there's a letter from Hippolyta. She wants to hear everything in person." "A letter to come in person? Your grandmother is dramatic," Diana said. "It's one of her better qualities." She picked up his trunk with one hand effortlessly, which caught the attention of approximately 6 people nearby. She also sent a book, The History of the Pre-Classical Magical Tradition on the Island. She thought you might find it useful for next year. "Antiope told her about Hogwarts," Harry said. "Everyone told everyone about Hogwarts. You've been the island's most interesting topic for 10 months." She started walking toward the barrier, trunk in one hand, the crowd parting around her with the instinctive deference that large forces of nature tended to produce. "Thalia has learned to read English specifically so she can receive your letters. She refuses to admit this." Harry fell into step beside her. "Thalia hates reading. She does it for you anyway." Diana glanced down at him with the expression that was only ever for him. "You are very well loved, Harry." "I know," he said. He meant all of it, the island, the friends behind him on the platform, the castle somewhere to the north, the year that had just finished, the years ahead that were beginning. He knew he held it. He didn't need it to be anything other than what it was. They stepped through the barrier together, into the ordinary hum of King's Cross Station, muggle and modern and entirely unknowing, full of people going everywhere. Harry walked into it without slowing. 6 months later in October, a letter arrived at a flat in Mayfair addressed to Diana of Themyscira in handwriting that Harry recognized as Dumbledore's and that Diana read twice and set down on the kitchen table with the expression of someone who has been given information they expected but not yet. "He's moving," she said. "Voldemort. Not directly, the Ministry is already beginning to pretend he doesn't exist. Dumbledore is building something. He wants to talk." Harry looked up from his homework. "About what?" "About the future," Diana said. "About what comes next." She looked at him. "About you." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at his homework, potions theory, Hermione's correction marks in the margins in neat red ink, a note from Ron clipped to the corner about their first match of the year 3 weeks away. The wooden disc from Antiope at his throat. The view from the Mayfair window, London going about itself in the October dark, entirely unaware. He looked at all of it. "Tell him yes," Harry said. "Tell him I'm happy to meet, and tell him I'll bring my own terms." Diana smiled. She picked up her quill and the smile stayed as she wrote, and it was the smile she had on the dock of the Themyscira the morning Harry had left, and the smile from the library doorway when he argued with Antiope at 5 years old, and the smile from the cliff above the eastern harbor when the sun came up over the Aegean and he had asked her if he was going to be okay. The same smile. The smile that said, "Yes, obviously yes. Look at you." Harry went back to his homework. Athena arrived at the window with a letter from Ron about Quidditch, and one from Hermione about a book she'd found over half-term, and one from Neville about a plant his grandmother had identified from the island's old botanical records. Harry read them all, one after another, in the warm light of the kitchen, and wrote back to each of them, and then went to find Diana to tell her what was in them, because she had been asking about Ron's flying progress and Hermione's research and Neville's herbology. Had been asking about all 3 of them with the focused warmth of someone who had decided they belonged in the category of people worth keeping track of. Which was, Harry knew, Diana's version of love, that full, specific, attending kind. The same kind his mother had given him without ever having the chance to show him. He understood, standing in the kitchen doorway watching Diana read his letter about Ron's flying with a smile that had nothing performed about it, that some things were given to you and some things you built, and the wisest people he had ever known drew no meaningful distinction between the two. His mother had died giving him time. Diana had used that time to give him a world. And now he was standing at the edge of 2 of them, both real, both his, the one he'd grown up in and the one he was growing into. And whatever came next, Voldemort's patience, the Ministry's denial, the long, slow arc of a conflict that had started before he was born, he was going into it as himself, completely without apology. The Prince of Themyscira, the boy who lived, Harry Potter, all of the above. He went to find Diana and tell her about Ron's flying, and she listened, and the evening was warm.